Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Had a Healing Quirk of Sacrifice? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku stared down at his red shoes despondently as Death Arms lectured him about running into an active hero scene. He had almost been too late to save Kaken. Thank goodness he had heard the explosions the hot-headed boy had put out as a natural response to getting suffocated by living slime. The moment he saw Kaken asking for help with his red eyes, he knew it was serious. Izuku had never seen Kaken ask for help. The boy was fiercely independent and always pushed away any efforts Izuku made at healing him. He had even walked home on a sprained ankle rather than accept help from a Deku like you. With little thought, the scrappy boy shed his gloves and ducked under the caution tape. He threw his bright yellow backpack straight at the slime's eyes. From the swearing, Izuku could tell he had hit his target, but he paid no heed as he grabbed at the slime covering his childhood playmate's face. The moment his fingers touched Kaken's skin, his quirk activated, sending a spurt of healing energy to Kaken's wrists, throat, and lungs to soothe the pain the liquid was causing in its passage. Kaken was yelling at Izuku, but Izuku paid him no heed as he grabbed Kaken's newly healed wrists and tried to gain enough momentum to pull his friend out of the offending sludge. Just as Izuku became desperate, All Might launched a powerful punch that blew the sludge away and sent the two boys tumbling to the ground. The end result was Izuku pretending to listen to Death Arms' lecture on vigilantism while nursing the feeling of emptiness that always came when he used his quirk. An hour later, Death Arms had finally finished and the empty feeling had subsided, leaving an exhausted Izuku to trudge home. He was stopped by Kaken stomping up to him and declaring how he didn't need any help from a useless Deku before storming home. The second time he was stopped, it was by a tall blonde man that looked like a skeleton. The man had walked out of a side alley and started scanning the sidewalk as if he were looking for something. Any other day Izuku would have just walked by, especially with the suspicious behavior the man was exhibiting. However, Izuku could tell just from looking at him that he was in tremendous pain. Izuku stepped right in front of the man whose eyes snapped down to him in surprise, before asking the question that would haunt All Might forever. "Why are you pushing through the pain?" Toshinori Yagi did not know what to make of the boy in front of him. The boy's bravery in his escapade with the slime villain had deeply impressed Yagi. He had found himself curious enough to follow the boy and encourage him to continue helping those around him within the safe parameters. After all, he had received a very thorough lecture from Death Arms. Imagine his surprise when the boy not only spotted him first, but walked right up to him with unnervingly bright green glowing eyes and asked why he was pushing through the pain. Before he could respond, the boy had ushered him to a nearby bench and sat him down before hovering in front of him and biting his lip. The boy's eyes had dimmed to a natural shade of green and he seemed overcome with anxiety when he realized he had just bullied a sickly stranger into sitting down on a bench. "I'm sorry, sir," the boy said with a bit of a blush. "My quirk allows me to assess injuries or anomalies in someone's bodies. I can't really turn it off. I'm sorry, that was so rude of me." All Might chuckled at the boy's bashfulness before speaking up. "No worries, child," Yagi said. "This is an old injury and it does cause quite a lot of pain, but I have gotten used to it. I actually came looking for you." "Why?" Izuku gasped. "I saw the sludge villain thing earlier and wanted to make sure you were okay." Toshinori responded, trying not to wince in shame at the fact that he had not been able to catch it before it caused such a scene. "I thought what you did was brave, and although it was reckless, I believe it was what a true hero would do." Izuku's eyes widened and began filling with tears as he smiled and stammered his thanks. "Do you want to be a hero?" "Yes," Izuku said without an ounce of hesitation. "I want to be a rescue hero like Recovery Girl and help heroes and civilians when they are injured." "You seem to have a good quirk for that," Yagi said. "Are you trying to get into UA?" "Of course," Izuku said with enthusiasm. "It's where All Might and Endeavor and Eraserhead went to school. I want to go to the same school they did. Plus, Recovery Girl works there. If I get in, I was hoping to be able to learn about medicine from her." If that's the case, you'll need to start working out. The hero course entrance exam is notoriously difficult and leans in the favor of physical quirks. Would you like me to help you train? How can you train me when you are always in such pain? Izuku asked hesitantly as if he did not wish to offend the man. Iyagi laughed. You will be the one doing all the work. I will just be sitting on the sidelines cheering you on. Here's my card if you decide you are interested. The boy looked at Yagi's business card that declared him to be All Might's secretary, and his eyes bulged out of his head in surprise. You work for All Might? Izuku screeched. That's so cool. Yagi just laughed and began to stand. I don't think I ever caught your name, Yagi said as he straightened his posture. Oh, it's Midoriya, Izuku said with a smile. Yagi noted that he did not state his first name, which was very smart considering how Yagi was virtually a complete stranger asking a child by himself if they wanted to train. It was good to meet you, Midoriya, but I must be going now. The boy looked as if he was debating something before looking up at the man with determined eyes. Do you mind if I use my quirk on you to help relieve some of the pain? Taken off guard, Yagi responded with a question. I thought your quirk was only for assessing injuries? Izuku shook his head and replied, No, if I make skin contact with an injured person, the wounds my eyes assessed will be healed, or relieved of pain if it is above my abilities to heal. Interesting, Yagi hummed thoughtfully. What's the backlash? It depends on the type of wound, Izuku replied helpfully. Usually, I just lose touch with my emotions for an extended amount of time, but sometimes if the wound is fresh I end up transferring the wound to my own body. Since yours is an old wound, I would just lose sense of my emotions for a while. If you're sure it won't be a burden, I would really appreciate that, Yagi said. Izuku nodded and took off a glove before extending his hands as if he was giving a handshake. With a little hesitance, Yagi placed his hand in the teen's. In mere moments, Yagi felt better than he had in years. He felt his aches and pains leave, and a minute later the boy let go of his hand. Yagi looked at the boy with a huge smile to say his thanks. The neutral look on the boy's face unnerved him a little, after seeing how expressive the boy had been moments before. The boy looked at Yagi and blinked slowly before bowing and heading home. When the boy was out of sight, Yagi quickly hid, bulked up, and went to see Recovery Girl. He really hoped the boy called him to train, but even if he didn't, he knew he could convince Recovery Girl to give the boy a recommendation. If his quirk was this strong, she would want to know about it. The cane shaped like a syringe hit Yagi squarely between the eyes after he had retold his story to Recovery Girl. Oh, what was that for? Yagi said as he rubbed the spot. You let a child with an unknown background and clear tendency to be reckless use his quirk on you after a harrowing experience in which he may or may not have used his quirk in? Chio Shizenji was appalled at her old friend. Healing quirk or not? He is as yet untested. What if he healed something in the wrong way? Or what if his quirk only affects pain receptors, which means you transforming right after being healed could have cut your time doubly in half? I hadn't thought of that, Yagi said chastened, as he powered down and allowed Chio to run some tests to make sure he hadn't done something stupid. The boy seemed so sincere. Although it was odd that the healing requirement was that he would lose touch with his emotions for a while. He went from anxious and worried to emotionless in less than a minute. Chio listened with half an ear as she looked through the results. It seemed the boy had partially blocked his pain receptors during the healing, but it looked like he had healed the fatigue and wear and tear All Might's body had gained since he lost his lung and part of his stomach. Chio hummed. I hope you don't have plans for the rest of the day. I need to do some more tests. What did you say the boy's name was? Midoriya, Yagi said. I don't know if that was his real name on account of the fact that he had green hair and green eyes, but I did give him my business card and offered to train him for UA. At this point, Chio once again smacked him between the eyes. Stop doing things that make you look like a sketchy child. Ouch. We'll have to have Netsu figure out who this kid is, Chio said. If his healing quirk did what I think it did, this kid will be a target no matter where he goes to high school. I would much rather have him here. That's great, All Might said. I was hoping to ask you to recommend him if his healing was the real deal. Needless to say, Yagi had a prominent red mark on his forehead before he left the office that day. You say the child's quirk was able to alter All Might's vital organs to sustain his current strength without spitting up blood after transforming for more than 3 hours? Nedzu said as he went over the tests. That's correct, sir, Chio said as she watched the rodent's smile grow. Don't you dare tell that musclehead that information or he will try to push it until he is back in his previous condition. You and I both know he will likely push it anyway, Nedzu says with a small chuckle, but I won't tell him. What was the name and description Yagi-san gave you? Chio relayed the information which Nedzu quickly used to find several possible matches. There are 3 registered healing quirks within the possible age group Yagi mentioned, but none of them have green eyes. Did Yagi mention any other traits? Just that the boy's healing quirk was powered by his emotions. Nedzu says as he taps a few more keys on his specialized keyboard. Here's a possible match. It's not classified as a healing quirk, but a mental manipulation quirk instead. Let's send this picture to Yagi and see if he recognizes the boy. Why would it be classified as a mental manipulation quirk? It obviously heals physical wounds, Chio said as she moved to look over the principal's shoulder. Apparently, it originally manifested during an incident with his abusive father. The man was hitting his wife and Izuku touched him to stop the assault and the man dropped to the floor with a huge smile on his face. Investigators and doctors' notes said the boy had somehow altered the neural pathway that causes the brain to react aggressively, Nedzu explained. The boy was immediately placed in quirk counseling and taught about neural pathways until he showed mastery in the subject. He has been cleared to use his quirk with consenting parties, but apparently the quirk is always active. He is supposed to take precautions to avoid use of it. It's possible the quirk affects more than that. But it was never updated in the registry. It says here his quirk files seem to have been tagged by the HPSC. If his mother didn't want him to be taken, she probably would have avoided giving them any extra information. Yagi just confirmed that this was the boy he saw. What happened to the boy in his quirk manifestation? Yagi said the boy lost touch with his emotions when he healed him. The boy apparently became as aggressive as his father was previously, but was quickly subdued by his mother's quirk when she found out what was going on. She named his quirk Sacrifice when she heard the details, Nedzu said. Well, that's not ominous or anything, Chio said. Poor dear. I will recommend him when you track him down. I would love to work with him and help him figure out the full extent of his quirk. Very well, Nedzu said. Midoriya laid on his bed and stared up at the ceiling while he waited for some kind of feeling to return to him. He must have underestimated the extent of the damage he had healed. Usually it would only take about 30 minutes for his emotions to return after alleviating some pain. He had always been bad about holding back his quirk once the healing commenced. The man had been in pain, there was no doubt about that. If any normal citizen had been in that much pain, they wouldn't have been able to move, let alone hold a conversation and interact with others. Izuku glanced at the clock as he felt his emotions begin to return. It had been about 3 hours since he healed the man. Anger was the first emotion to return, as it always was. He hated being angry, it was always the first emotion he sacrificed when healing someone. Of course that made sense when it came to the order in which they returned. Next came fear, followed closely by sadness, disgust, curiosity, calm, kindness and joy. Izuku pulled himself up into a meditating position as he allowed the feelings to crash over him in waves. Breathe in. When he felt his emotions steady, he opened his eyes to look at the clock once again. It had taken him another hour to finally balance his mental state. A smell wafted to his nose, promptly eliciting a growl of hunger from his stomach. He stood and made his way to the kitchen where his mother was preparing their dinner. Evening, Mom, Izuku said with a bright smile as he grabbed the plates from the cupboard. Oh, hello dear, Inko replied with a smile of her own. Thank you for setting the table. Dinner should be ready in 5 minutes. How was your day? Izuku thought about everything that had happened that day and decided on saying, oh, it was exciting. School was normal, but on the way home I got caught up in a villain attack. But don't worry. All Might took care of it in a matter of seconds. Then on my way home I met this poor old man who was in so much pain. I asked him if I could use my quirk to help alleviate the pain, and he said yes, but it took a lot out of me. At the end of his rambling, Inko turned off the oven and pulled her son into a tight hug. "Oh, honey," Inko said as she held him tight and tried to keep her worried tears in as she pulled away and looked into his eyes. "Are you all right?" Izuku gave his mom a knowing smile and grabbed her hands in a comforting gesture. "It took longer than usual to balance, but I managed it like the therapist told me to. I also made sure I wasn't being tailed before I healed the man. I don't want to give up this peaceful time we have together." Inko gave him a tight hug and then turned back to take dinner out of the oven. "Good," Inko said, "we don't want a repeat of the Valentine's incident." "I thought we agreed to forget about that." Izuku squeaked in embarrassment. "I could never forget it." Inko said with an amused smile, "You sacrificed every feeling except for love to heal those burn scars on that poor runaway and ended up confessing your love to anything that moved for the next 2 hours. I have so many great pictures. Whoever thinks my mother is a harmless is blind," Izuku muttered under his breath as he placed 2 glasses of water on the table. "What was that, dear?" Inko said with a teasing smile. "Nothing, I love you," Izuku said as he kissed her cheek and sat down. The little family had a dinner full of teasing and comfort before Mom brought up the news she had been dreading sharing. "Izuku," Inko said in a serious tone. "There's something I need to tell you." Izuku looked up at the tone of her voice to meet her green eyes full of worry. "What is it, Mom?" "Hisashi will be released from prison at the end of the year," Inko said, as she kept her eyes on his looking for his reaction. "We still have a restraining order out against him, and I don't think he will try to contact us, but I thought I should let you know." Izuku froze at the news. Inko saw the fear and guilt flash in his eyes before he processed the rest of his sentence, and relaxed. "Do you know where he's going to be staying?" "Unfortunately not, although I was told that he has to report into his parole officer weekly and if he was spotted in our area we would be informed." Izuku's shoulders relaxed at the news. "It's hard to know he's out there, but if he stays away it should be fine, right?" Izuku said before he remembered the card Yagi had given him. "I think I might start training to get into UA. I found someone who was willing to help me train. I have to do some more research though. The circumstances were a little sketchy when he handed me his card." Inko smiled at his nervous rambling, but cut in at his last comment. "Just make sure I meet whoever you decide to train with." Izuku nodded, and then the pair cleaned up their dishes and got ready for their respective evenings. Inko Midoriya finished getting ready for her evening shift at the hospital while Izuku got ready for bed. Hisashi had been fairly wealthy before he was thrown in jail. When Inko divorced him, she had received a hefty amount of money as a divorce settlement as well as a monthly stipend for Izuku's child support from his lawyers, but Inko was cautious. She had picked up a job that she and Izuku could live off of and kept the money she received in the bank as a failsafe for if she ever needed to take Izuku and run from her ex when he finally got out of prison. She had updated their passports when she got the news and got visas started for the States if necessary. The man might be a villain now, but he used to be a popular hero. He had plenty of contacts from both sides of the tracks he could use if he really wanted to enact his revenge on an old ex and the son that had outed him as an abuser. Of course, that was just justification for arresting him. After he had been taken into custody, they had charged him with corruption among other things. He had gone from a respected hero to an infamous villain in a single night. She knew he was subtle and cunning. He always repaid his debts. He would come after them, it was just a matter of when. While Inko might not know if she was technically on his list, she knew her son was. She would do anything to protect him. Shaking herself from her dark thoughts, she gave Izuku a quick kiss on the cheek and headed out the door. She had made it 2 blocks before she got a call from an unknown number. She silenced her phone and let it go to voicemail. If it was important, they would leave a message. It wasn't until early that morning when her shift was over that she noticed that there was indeed a voicemail. Anxiously, she listened to it and felt some hope for her son's future in this country. Netsu had personally called his mother. Izuku was freaking out just a little. It turned out that that man really was All Might's secretary, and since his healing had been the real deal, he had caught the attention of Recovery Girl. That's why he was currently sitting in her office with a cup of tea having an in-depth conversation about quirks and health with his #1 idol. All Might was a very close second. Izuku thought there was no way it could get better than this until Nezu decided to drop in on their conversation. Young Midori. Sounds like you and Miss Shizenji are getting along just fine, the Chimera said pleasantly as he brewed a cup of tea for himself. Oh, hello Principal Nezu sir, Midoriya said as he hastily stood and gave the principal a small bow. It's been a while since I could talk to someone who has as much knowledge as Recovery Girl does. Nezu chuckled at the boy's enthusiasm and immediately felt a kinship with the boy. He often felt the same way, especially amongst his colleagues who tended to be muscleheads, strategical muscleheads perhaps, but they did tend to hit first and ask questions later with a few exceptions. I have talked to your mother, Nezu said. She approved my proposal on the condition that you agreed. What proposal would that be? Midoriya said, betraying a little anxiety as his voice cracked just a bit. We would like to offer you a spot here in the support course this upcoming semester, Nezu stated, plainly pleased with the astonished look on the boy's face. With the expectation that you can pass our written exam, of course. Your mother mentioned that you had the intention to take the hero course exam. Under normal circumstances, I would encourage that. However, taking into account how strong your quirk is, I would like you to get as much medical training as possible. The support course would give you more flexibility to work with Recovery Girl and, should you prove yourself capable in Yagi-san's training, I would be able to make you a unique schedule that would allow you to train as both a support and hero student. Does that sound agreeable to you? Izuku's eyes were sparkling and he was hanging on to every word Nezu said as if it were some precious resource that hadn't been seen in a million years. Are you sure? Izuku asked with his voice full of incredulity. I'm sure you've looked into my records, you know who my father is, and have seen the marks on my school history. You're still willing to give me this opportunity? Nezu's eyes gained a calculating glint as he looked at the boy. Of course I have seen the records, but I have also seen footage from the school's security cameras and know they are not credible. As for your father, mine was a simple field mouse. Look at me now. Our heritage is a part of us, yes, but it does not have to define our character unless we let it. Izuku's eyes began to water as he clenched the fabric of his pants with his right hand and determinedly wiped away the tears that had escaped his grasp. I would did he love to accept your offer, sir, Izuku stuttered as he tried to regain some control over his emotions. Recovery Girl placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder in an effort to comfort him but paused when she felt the bandages there. What happened to your shoulder, boy? Recovery Girl said, causing Izuku to flinch and blush. Aicha, nothing, Izuku said as he avoided her eyes. Nezu chuckled as the boy's inability to lie. I suggest you allow her to treat that burn young Midoriya. He stood his ground as the green-haired boy's eyes flitted to him in fear. Please don't get Kaken in trouble, Izuku pleaded as he looked at Nezu. No one else has ever told him he was wrong before. Nezu's eyes turned cold. Are you saying that suicide baiting someone is an excusable behavior? Recovery Girl's face went stony as she heard the implications. Of course not, Izuku said, reaching out towards the principal as if to placate him as he would his mother before catching himself. He's not the first one to do it, and the teachers have never said anything about it even when it was done in front of them by the other students. So, it's excusable because it has been done to you before? Nezu said mercilessly as he watched Izuku's frustration and desperation flit across his face plainly. No, Izuku said as he took a breath to calm himself. It's not excusable, but the blame should be put on the adults who allowed and encouraged it, not on a teen who doesn't know. I've grown up with this boy. He's been taught to be violent because he has a violent quirk. He's been taught to win at all costs by idols like Endeavor. He's been taught that yelling and aggression is acceptable behavior by his own parents, for heaven's sake. He is a product of his environment. I agree with you on several points you made, Nezu replies after a few moments. However, a teenager should be able to recognize and distinguish between right and wrong no matter what environment they were raised in. I'm sorry, Midoriya, but this boy will need to face consequences for his actions, as will those around him. That being said, should he apply to UA, he will get the same consideration as any other applicant, of that I can assure you. Izuku slumped in defeat and replied with a meek nod as he finally peeled off his shirt and allowed Recovery Girl to look at his shoulder. Nedzu had to keep from hissing at the amount of scars the boy had. Midoriya, Shizenji began before being cut off by the boy. Most of them are from my quirk. When I learned about the physical healing aspect of the quirk, I was trying to relieve the pain from someone who had received a new wound. I ended up trading my health for hers in the exchange, and her wound transferred to me. As you can tell, it took me a while to overcome that particular drawback, Izuku said with a shaky smile. Most of the scars are from experimenting with that aspect of the quirk. I found out later that I could sacrifice my emotions instead of my physical health when healing physical quirks, and have gotten a few less scars. The most recent scars are from the bullying. Why did they bully you? Recovery Girl asked as she gently cleaned the wound and kissed him on the cheek. Kaken let it slip who my father was, and I never used my quirk in front of them, so they assumed I was quirkless, Midoriya said as he rubbed his eyes. Nedzu stayed silent as he observed the wound heal as if it was new, then asked the question he had wished to confirm since he heard the specifics of Izuku's quirk. Midoriya, does your quirk allow you to give the pain you receive to others? I've never thought of that before, Midoriya said as he yawned into his hand. Recovery Girl and Nedzu shot each other a glance and a smile as the boy started nodding off. Go ahead and sleep for a bit, dear, Shizenji said as she placed a blanket on the boy. Within moments the boy was asleep. He has such a kind heart, Shizenji said as she ruffled the sleeping teen's hair and turned back to Nedzu. You burned that school down to the ground, right? Nedzu took a sip from his teacup before answering, of course. What kind of principal would I be if I let that extent of bullying go? I have Hound Dog working with the investigators so the kids and adults will get fitting punishments and therapy for their offenses. Midoriya was right. These bullies really were a product of their environment. It's a wonder Midoriya even survived that environment. He never revealed the full extent of his bullying to his mother, she just thought he was having a rough time making friends. He thought back to his meeting with Inko and how horrified she was when she watched the video evidence of some of the bullying Nedzu had shown her to erase any doubts she had about getting Izuku out of that environment. He had of course offered her access to a colleague's online courses that would accept him with his recommendations, but Inko had surprisingly turned down that offer and said that Izuku could just test out early. Apparently, the boy was years ahead in his coursework because he was enamored with learning. A knock on the door revealed Inko Midoriya as she entered the room to see Izuku sleeping. I can't tell you how grateful I am for you to offer him this opportunity, the young mother said as she gazed lovingly at her child who had burrowed into the blanket Recovery Girl had given him. I always thought he would tell me if he was being bullied, she sighed. How could I have missed this? Recovery Girl offered the woman a chair as she comforted her. Children with a history of severe abuse sometimes have a hard time getting how peers are supposed to behave towards them and vice versa, Recovery offered. Sometimes even if they know they allow it to happen, because it's not as bad as before, or they feel they deserve it somehow. These attitudes can persist years after the trauma, even with therapy. Young Izuku is a survivor. Nedzu chipped in as well. He'll be alright with a little bit of guidance. That's what we are here for. You're right, Inko said as she wiped the tears from her cheeks. I can't do anything about the past, but I can look to the future. He has such potential. You'll help him, won't you? As much as we are able, Nedzu said with a genuine smile. I'm looking forward to working with your son, Shizenji said. Inko smiled at the two gratefully and tucked her plans to run away with her son firmly in the back of her mind. She knew Yue could keep her baby safer than she ever could, but she also knew if she stayed her ex could use her as leverage to get his revenge on their child. There was no way she was going to let that happen. She would talk it over with Izuku in the near future. They had another 10 months until he was free after all. Izuku did in fact test out of middle school as well as high school. Nedzu had tested him personally, unknown to Izuku. The boy thought he was taking a mock entrance exam, but he was in fact taking his high school finals exam. It had given him an astonishing sense of accomplishment when he found out. He knew he was ahead, but hadn't imagined it was by that much. This accomplishment had allowed Nedzu to jam-pack Midoriya's upcoming schedule with loads of medical, hero, and support classes as well as personal lessons with Nedzu on analysis and tactics. Needless to say, Izuku was more excited to go to school than he ever had in his entire life. His training with Yagi-sensei had been unexpectedly normal. The man had whipped up a health and exercise plan that Izuku followed religiously, and had trained the boy in heavy lifting by having him clean up the beach. Occasionally, they would be joined by a buff blonde with beady eyes who had obtained some kind of quirk mutation he needed extra training on. Izuku, with Recovery Girl's permission, had practiced his healing quirk on the boy by sacrificing different materials: lipids, water, fat cells, stamina, etc. However, he still found sacrificing his emotions to be the easiest method of healing. They would come back the quickest, everything else had to be regained the old-fashioned way. During the insane training schedule, Izuku made sure to spend time with his mother. She had been acting more and more anxious as the time for his father's release drew closer. She pulled him close and just held him like she had when he was little. He responded in kind. She had told him about her fears that his father would come for them despite the measures they had taken to protect themselves. She had mentioned her plan to flee to America with Izuku one night. He had been surprised, but thinking back he shouldn't have been. She had dropped a lot of hints throughout the years about visiting a relative in the USA if they had the chance. She had even enrolled him in English lessons, and he was fluent. He had taken her hands and just listened. He could feel her fear. It was so intense it was affecting her ability to breathe. He had done some minor healing so she could get out the words she felt she needed to say. "I'm scared, Izuku," his mother had sobbed into his shoulder. "I'm so scared he'll come back and hurt us like he did before. I shouldn't be crying to you like this. I'm the adult, I should be strong. If I'm always afraid, how can I expect you to feel safe?" Izuku hugged her as he fought tears of his own. "It's okay to be afraid, Mama," he said, pulling her close. "You are the one who told me that you can't let fear stop you from going forward. Do you remember?" Inko did remember. It had been after Katsuki and Izuku's first fight. The boy had hit Izuku's hand and cussed him out instead of letting him help him up. Izuku had been terrified and ran home crying because he thought that somehow he had given his father's anger to Kaken. She had assured him that it wasn't possible because she had his gloves on and then told him about fear. "I remember that. I also told you it was okay to run away when you were afraid, but only if you knew there was nothing you could do to fix the situation. Do you remember that?" "Of course I do," Izuku said with a smile. "I can't tell you how much that annoyed Kaken when I wouldn't just leave the other kids he picked on behind." Inko laughed at the mention of Mitsuki's son, but soon her face turned serious. She pulled her hands out of Izuku's grasp and put her hands on his shoulders. "Son, I am going to America to start over. I have a friend from college who is willing to help me get started. I think it would be best for me to stay away in case your father tries anything while you are at UA. I have talked it over with Nedzu and have given UA rights to your guardianship while I am away. If anything changes and you don't feel safe anymore, I'll come to get you. Do you understand?" Izuku's eyes filled with tears, but he gave a determined nod. His mother was acknowledging him and his dream, as well as the people he had put his faith in to keep him safe. "I'll miss you," Izuku said as he dived in for another hug, which Inko reciprocated. They spent the rest of the night watching pre-Quirk movie reruns and stuffing their faces with sweets. Logistics could wait until tomorrow. Yagi watched as Izuku and Mirio roared from the top of the truck they had just filled with the last of the trash from Dagoba Beach. He smiled and thought back to the time he had met them. Izuku had so much more confidence now, not to mention muscle. These 10 months had proven to Yagi that the boy had not only the determination, but the skills to become a great hero. Mirio had been introduced to him by his old colleague Night Eye. All Might had trained him for 2 weeks before he decided to allow him to shoulder the burden of One for All. He had shadowed the boy on his internship and seen his compassion and battle prowess, both of which would serve him well as a hero with or without his additional quirk. What really sealed the deal was when young Mirio stopped to help a young girl find her way home. The girl had asked him why he wanted to be a hero. The young man had boisterously replied, "I want to save 1,000,000 people," as he flashed a huge grin. The girl had giggled and the teen had knelt down to her eye level and given her a serious answer. "I want people to have hope in the future. I want them to feel safe. That's why I want to be a hero." Yagi knew then that this boy was worthy. He had watched only a few days more after having Nedzu scan the boy's background for any red flags he might have overlooked. The day he got the all clear, Yagi offered his quirk to Mirio. The boy had asked questions, smart questions that All Might hadn't thought he would. With Nezu's help, he explained the dark history of the quirk and assured the young man that the largest threat was dead. After a week, Mirio had accepted the quirk. In the present, Yagi laughed boisterously as the boys' fist bumped each other and jumped onto the sand below. "Congratulations, boys," Yagi boomed in his best All Might voice. The pair smiled at the man before taking off for their respective exam day duties. Midoriya had been enlisted by Recovery Girl to be on site support for testing Area B during the Heroics exam, while Mirio was acting as on-site emergency support. The tests went smoothly. Well, as smoothly as they can when a traumatized rat is given a maze full of humans to play with. Midoriya had ended up rushing in at present Mick's request when one of the examinees had gained a concussion from falling rubble. He found himself scaling rooftops and watching the examinees from a distance. It was highly entertaining and useful for spotting injuries. He was only needed twice more before Nezu released the zero-pointer. Izuku watched the large robot rise in awe. He knew Majima-sensei had programmed it specifically to avoid the possibility it would actually harm any examinees, but it would be easy to forget if you were on the ground. He saw the majority of examinees start running away as soon as the mammoth appeared, before he heard a cry for help. Izuku zeroed in on the cry and found a brown-haired girl with a gravity quirk pinned under some rubble. He watched a few moments longer, willing one of the other contestants to turn around and help her. No one did. Izuku ran towards the girl whose cries had stopped as she realized no one was coming. When he reached her, the giant robot was only a few feet away, and the girl was looking at him in shock. He shot her a quick smile and placed his hand on hers, instantly healing her motion sickness. Her eyes blew wide and she immediately placed her hands on the rubble, pinning her down. The robot was inches away now. Izuku grabbed the girl and ran back towards the entrance, knowing that the final bell would ring in a few seconds. The girl held onto him and unknowingly she activated his quirk, draining his anger as it healed the leg that had been pinned under the large chunk of concrete. The bell rang and Izuku stopped, placing the girl down on her two fully healed feet. "Thanks for saving me," the girl beamed as she took in his appearance. The boy had a plain-looking face, but his green eyes and dark green hair seemed to shine as they caught the light, giving him an otherworldly feel. She felt heat rising in her cheeks as she realized that she found this boy attractive. "No problem," the boy replied with a bright smile that made him look as innocent as purely fallen snow. "You should be fully healed now," he continued as the girl tried to blink the sunspots from her eyes. "I hope you scored well. Plus ultra," he said enthusiastically as he ran off to check on the other examinees. Nezu cackled as Yagi openly laughed at Izuku's obliviousness. "That boy is the smartest dumb person in the world, I swear." "Oh, you know the greenie?" Midnight asked as she tapped her finger against her chin. "He seems like he'll be a heartbreaker when he grows up." Nezu ceased cackling. "That's Midoriya Izuku, Recovery Girl's newest student." "A healer, huh?" Midnight smiled. "That's convenient. He can tell if you are actually hurt or not just by looking at you. Don't fake an illness to try and mess with him," Aizawa said matter-of-factly as he slid out of his yellow sleeping bag and stowed it away. "How would you know?" Midnight asked with a pout. "Nezu sent a memo out on him this morning so we would know who he was. He officially became a ward of UA this morning when his mother left for the US, Aizawa replied. "You really should read your emails." Choosing to ignore that last comment, Midnight hurriedly pulled up the email and opened the file to skim through it, and swore softly. "He's Azar's kid?" The name of the infamous hero-turned-villain grabbed the attention of the rest of the staff, who quickly pulled up their emails as well. "How did I not know this?" Yagi cried as Nezu hopped off his chair. "The only reason the staff was informed is because Azar will be released from prison at the end of this month. We believe he might have a vendetta against his son. I will not tolerate any prejudice against him on account of his lineage, understand?" Nezu said in a serious tone that had the majority of teachers sweating. "Understood." The entirety of the staff replied as the Nezu exited. Izuku was exhausted, but the good kind. He felt like he had really made a difference today. It was almost like he had just gotten a taste of being a rescue hero. He couldn't wait for his mom to call him. It still felt weird not going home to the apartment they used to share. He felt a twinge of sadness hit him as he realized how much he missed her. He shook off that thought after a minute and decided to start refilling his bookshelves instead. Principal Nedzu had provided Izuku with a temporary room in the teacher dorms while the student dorms were being built. He continued to unpack until he heard a knock on his door. Surprised, Izuku set down his action figures and went to answer the door. The teachers had told him that they would be busy going over the exam results, but that they would pull him in to meet with the rest of the faculty tomorrow morning. He opened the door to find Principal Nedzu greeting him from Eraserhead's capture scarf. "Hello, young Midoriya." Nedzu chirped happily. "Aizawa and I have come to make sure you have everything you need for the night while you get all settled in." Eraserhead only grunted as he peered down at the boy. His stoic expression was somewhat wasted with Principal Nedzu acting cute and polite on his shoulder. "Ah," Midoriya said with a smile, "I think I've got everything I need. Lunch Rush stopped by earlier and gave me a bento for dinner. I don't think I could possibly eat it all. Would you like to share some with me?" "That would be lovely," Nedzu said as he hopped off of Aizawa's shoulders and walked with the boy towards the kitchen. Aizawa followed like a silent shadow. "What did you think of the exam?" "Well," Izuku started, "there are lots of students with amazing potential, at least in the area I was in. It's a shame that none of the kids with mental quirks would have a chance if they didn't have proper physical training though." Aizawa smirked as Nedzu turned to the boy with a calculating tilt to his head. "What makes you think that?" "Most kids with mental quirks only work on organic or sentient things. Take my healing for example. I couldn't physically do anything to that robot with my quirk. I would have to have had training on how to dismantle tech, or use some other tool to assist me if I were to actually succeed in destroying or stopping a robot," Izuku rambled intelligently. "Of course, if there were a rescue point system, where students are rewarded for helping others out of trouble, or taking care of the wounded or working together, there could be a balance of some sort. Although if examinees knew about the rescue points beforehand, it would defeat the purpose of rewarding them." "Ah, sorry I got a little carried away." Aizawa was just rolling his eyes as Nedzu started cackling. "No need to apologize, child," Nedzu said when he finally composed himself. "There is actually a system in place for rescue points, and any students who fail to pass the Hero Course exam but still show promise are given spots in the General Studies course that allows them a chance to transfer if they show potential during the sports festival or any other time during the year." "That makes so much sense," Izuku exclaimed. "And of course there are always some heroic students who end up dropping out or transferring to general courses if they decide to pursue a different path. That's not even taking into account Aizawa-sensei's high expulsion rate," Nedzu said as he tried to drag the older man into their conversation. "I only expel them if they have no potential or will get themselves killed sooner rather than later in the field," Aizawa grumbled. "So how do you measure their potential?" Izuku asked, curious as to how the pro would respond. "You'll be in my homeroom class, so you'll see sooner or later," Aizawa responded. Izuku froze in his tracks. "I get to be in Eraserhead's class," he shouted ecstatically as he looked at Aizawa with excited eyes. "I can't wait to learn from you." Nedzu chuckled at Aizawa's surprise, which he covered with a cough and a nod at the sparkly-eyed boy. He wasn't recognized by civilians very often, especially by teenagers. Hisashi and Midnight actually had a betting pool to see if his students could find out who his hero persona was before he expelled more than half his class. Midnight usually won that bet. "Aizawa will also be your main guardian during your first year here, so be sure to tell him if you are having any problems, all right?" Izuku nodded enthusiastically and the three eventually fell into an easy conversation as they ate. Once the dishes were done, the trio dispersed. Aizawa went to his room down the hall, and Nedzu to his nest he had hidden in the school. Bakugo entered the classroom first on that glorious first day of the rest of his life. Well, or at least he was supposed to be the first one there. A tall kid that was built like a wall and stupid anxious Deku stood chatting about the exam. Bakugo scoffed at their energetic conversation and slouched over to his seat, into which he promptly fell and kicked his feet up on the desk in front of him. As if sensing the disorder, the tall kid speed walked to his desk and promptly began to scold him. Bakugo growled at the extra to at least figure out his name before they were interrupted by a brunette with a very round face squealing the moment she saw Deku. She gushed about how he saved her or something stupid like that. Before Bakugo could set her straight, stupid Deku was better at hurting people than he was at saving people. The sludge villain was a fluke. Some grumpy dude with a roll of bandages hanging loosely around his shoulders came in, threw clothes at them, and told them to meet him on the field. Well, at least he could prove how much better he was than these useless extras. After Aldra Middle School had been shut down, Bakugo had been forced to take those stupid therapy sessions to avoid time in a juvenile correction facility. They kept telling him about how he should find some way to channel and contain his anger so he wouldn't act out. Bakugo had used that as an excuse to train. 24 Bakugo had had plenty of time to focus on his training. He had studied for and passed the national middle school exams once he heard that stupid Deku had already done his. Honestly, that idiot just had to get him in trouble. Even when he wasn't around, he found a way to make his life miserable. Sure, he might have been relieved when Deku had tried to save him from the sludge, but he was also afraid of what Deku could do to his mind. He never wanted to be at anyone's mercy, especially not Deku's. Izuku shuffled nervously as Uraraka stood beside him on the field. He knew Aizawa couldn't really expel him, only Nezu could unless he did something monumentally stupid or evil, but he still sweat-dropped with the rest of the class when the black-haired sensei declared that the lowest overall performer would be expelled from the course. Izuku completed the tests alongside his fellow classmates, in a few instances bargaining with them to help them both succeed on their tests. Aoyama allowed him to ride on his back through the short sprint test if he would heal him while he used his belly laser to propel them both over the finish line in 0.5 seconds, and Yaoyorozu allowed him to ride on her scooter after he healed her lipid deficiency. Despite the other students' protests, Aizawa allowed it on the basis that he was going to be a support hero that relied more on teamwork and support rather than individual combat fighting. In the end, Hagakure Toru placed last, and was greatly relieved when Aizawa gave his logical ruse excuse so he didn't have to expel any of them. Izuku hid an anxious smile when Yaoyorozu explained her hypothesis, but didn't share Aizawa's overall expulsion rate. After changing, Izuku was surprised to see Uraraka and Ida had both waited for him. They invited him to walk with them to the train station, and he explained that he actually lived on campus due to some family circumstances. Ida acknowledged it in his strict way, while Uraraka considered the implications worriedly. The girl was starting to really like this kind-hearted boy and didn't want anything to happen to him. Izuku brushed off her concerns and managed to convince her and Ida to catch their trains by saying he would hang out with them on the weekends instead. They acknowledged it and Izuku retreated. He was surprised that Bakugo did not try to hurt or harass him all day. It was the first time Izuku had been in the same class with the boy, but hadn't gotten cornered or insulted by him once all day. He thought back to their youth and wondered where it all went wrong. Maybe it was when his father was arrested? Izuku and his mother had had to be put in protective custody until after his father's trial because of how high-profile the case had become. During that time, Izuku had been assigned to a quirk counselor who would help him control his quirk due to his connections to the Hero Commission. They were able to test his quirk and find out its abilities and drawbacks. When Izuku had shown an affinity for physical healing as well as mental manipulation, the quirk counselor had had several hushed conversations with his mother who had apparently been fighting the Hero Commission from trying to take custody of Izuku. The quirk counselor agreed to keep the healing ability secret from the Hero Commission, and Izuku had been able to stay with his mom. It had taken 3 months before Izuku and his mother were allowed out in public once more. Izuku had gone to find Kaken first thing. The blonde had given him a hug and then asked what his quirk was. Izuku had told him that he wasn't allowed to use it yet, but that he could sacrifice something from himself to change something in someone else. Kaken had wanted to see it, but Izuku tearfully refused as Kaken became more and more aggressive in asking. Once the blonde had realized that the green-haired boy would not answer, he created little explosions on his hand and mumbled something Izuku couldn't quite hear. Then he spun on his heel and picked up his bug-catching stuff, leading Izuku to another group of boys. They had decided earlier that day that they were going to try and catch some beetles in the woods. Kaken led the way. The boys had followed him exactly, even when he tried to cross a bridge on the railing. Kaken lost his footing on the slippery rail and had fallen into the stream. The other boys called down to him from the railing, but Izuku had come down to make sure his friend was all right. That was when Kakin had slapped his hand away and started yelling at him. Confused, Izuku took a step back, afraid he had somehow accidentally give Kakin his father's irrational anger. When Kakin's explosions began to flare, Izuku took off like a shot. His mother assured him it wasn't his fault. She knew Kakin was a passionate child who had a hard time expressing himself clearly and told Izuku as much. Izuku had accepted the explanation, but continued to grow more and more confused as Kakin stayed angry. Kakin started bullying him, and those with weaker or invisible quirks. Once when Kakin had hurt the kid before Izuku could get there to help, Izuku had used his quirk to take Kakin's terrible anger and replace it with his exhaustion. Izuku knew from his quirk control classes that if Kakin had continued to beat the child would be unable to heal without help from a doctor. As it was, Kakin fell asleep, and Izuku took the kid to the nurse while Kakin's friends tried to wake him up. After that day, Kakin stopped bullying the other kids and focused solely on Izuku. He told the kids who Izuku's father was, and claimed that Izuku would be a villain just like him. Izuku knew it was wrong, and that he should probably tell his mother, but she was working so hard. She was trying to stay strong for Izuku. He knew that. He would sometimes hear her crying when she thought he was asleep, or check on him in the middle of the night after she had a nightmare. She didn't need him to add to her troubles. Plus, somewhere deep down, Izuku had felt like he deserved it. If he had just been a little more obedient to his father wouldn't get mad. If he had helped Mom hide the alcohol better, Dad wouldn't have gotten drunk. He was a mean drunk. If he had manifested his quirk a day earlier, he wouldn't have nearly made his dad brain dead. The quirk counselor and the therapist his mother had made him go see when he was younger had both told him it wasn't his fault. They had explained that it was his father's decision to fall prey to his anger and greed. Izuku had just had to bear witness of the consequences. He was a child, afraid for his life, and the life of his mother. It was natural to protect himself with his quirk. Izuku hadn't believed it when they told it to him, but he had nodded along anyway and repeated their answers back at them. Sometimes, he would think back on their words and hope they were right, but not often enough. Instead, he tried to save everyone and anyone he could from situations like the one he had been in. If he could redirect the anger towards himself, no one else would get hurt. If he could heal someone, no matter what kind of hurt they had, he would. As the kids grew older, the bullying escalated. Izuku took it quietly and tried to avoid the bullies. None of them knew the full story anyway. All they knew was that he was the son of a villain who was probably quirkless. Fights got blamed on him. Duties got pushed onto him. The vindictive teachers set out to fail him in some way or another. Izuku never complained. He was smart. He knew they were just doing what they were told. The heroes' and newscasters' careless words and opinions were carved into their very psyche. Villains are pure evil, therefore their family members must be evil too. Heroes are good. Everyone loves heroes. Heroes defeat villains. Everyone wants to be a hero, so they have to keep track of potential villains and snuff them out before they become a threat. Izuku heard them too, but he didn't take them at face value. Things were never as black and white as they seemed. His father had been a hero and a villain. He did good in the public eye and evil behind locked doors. He was gray. Izuku himself was a little gray. He lied a lot, out of the intention of being good and protecting others, but he still lied. Maybe that was why Kakin hated him. Maybe he could tell that Izuku was a liar. He had given up trying to placate Kakin, but he would rather see the boy become a hero than a villain. He would be devastating on either side of the field. Izuku would much rather have him on the hero's side. They would teach him not to hurt as many people. A hand on his shoulder startled Izuku, and he turned to see Aizawa regarding him with a raised eyebrow. "Are you okay, kid?" the taciturn teacher asked. "You've been staring at that door handle for 5 minutes now." Izuku blinked and then blushed. "Oh, I'm sorry." Izuku apologized as he opened the door and stepped through, holding it for his homeroom teacher as well. "I was lost in thought." "Who is Kakin?" Aizawa asked as he followed Izuku inside. "Oh, I was mumbling, wasn't I?" "Katsuki Bakugo," Izuku said with a small smile. "We grew up together. I know about the issues you two have had. Aizawa said, bluntly cutting Izuku off from whatever he would have said next. Bakugo is here on probation. He was placed in my class so I could cancel his quirk if he became too aggressive. I will make sure that you two are never placed in the same group, and the other teachers will do the same. Make sure to let us know if anything happens between you two when a teacher is not present. We want to make sure that you are safe here. Izuku blinked slowly as he tried to process the information Aizawa had given him. Thank you, sensei, he said with a bow. Aizawa nodded and then added, if you need someone to talk to, I'm always here. If you would like to talk to a professional secret keeper, we have several on staff here at UA. Any of them would be willing to help you. Professional secret keeper? Izuku asked with a tilt of his head. Therapist kid, Aizawa said with a sigh. They know how to keep your secrets and don't share them unless it will cause danger not to. Plus, they help you work through whatever is going through your head. Izuku laughed. I never thought of them that way. What time do you usually eat dinner? Aizawa blinked at the subject change, but replied easily enough, 6 o'clock in the common room. Join me if you want. Izuku lit up at the invitation and then returned to his room to get started on the day's homework. The next day the class had their first heroics class from All Might himself. When he came in the door, Izuku sat up as if he had been struck by Kaminari's stray electricity. He recognized those wounds. He stared at All Might, trying to reconcile Yagi's skinny frame with this muscular giant. All Might finished his spiel and raced out the door. Uraraka floated Izuku's costume case over to his desk and dropped it with a thud. Izuku startled. What's wrong, Midoriya? She asked. You look like you've seen a ghost? Oh, Izuku said, shaking his head. It's nothing. He stood and grabbed his case. Thanks for getting my costume, I'll meet you on the field. They waved goodbye at the hallway that split the girls' lockers from the boys' lockers, and Izuku stepped into the room to change. He quickly changed, ignoring the other boys' questioning looks at his scars, and headed out to the field. He was impressed by many of the costumes. His own costume was a dark green jumpsuit with white stripes and several belts filled with medical supplies. He also had a helmet made, not unlike the pre-Quirk World War II helmets, to protect his head from anything that might fall or target him in the field. He tried not to smile at the fact that Kaken had decided to use the design they had made together as children, especially when the blonde started glaring in his direction as if daring him to say anything. Izuku just gave him a determined look in return, to which Kaken scoffed and turned away. Once all the students had arrived, All Might whooshed in and gave instructions, pairing them up randomly. Uraraka and Izuku were paired as villains up against Ojiro and Mineta as heroes. They were chosen to go first, so that Izuku could be used to offer first aid for the rest of the matches. Izuku and Uraraka quickly moved the bomb onto the roof to avoid Mineta's ability to stick Uraraka to the ceiling and then split up. Uraraka and Midoriya discussed several different strategies, focusing on Ojiro's obvious martial arts ability as the larger threat. Uraraka was tasked with tagging him to immobilize him, while Midoriya was to focus on Mineta. The horn sounded to begin the exercise, and Ojiro and Mineta stuck together to scout out rooms one by one. They went unimpeded until the third floor. Uraraka's silhouette appeared at the end of the hallway before dodging out of sight. The two boys reacted quickly, darting forward. Ojiro ran into the room they supposed Uraraka had been in, and was quickly tagged by the gravity user, who proceeded to tie him up while he was still disoriented by the lack of gravity. Meanwhile, Mineta was still looking around, trying to figure out where his partner went. Uraraka giggled as she used her quirk to crawl out the window and head to the roof. Mineta finally caught on and yelled in protest as he quickly following the laughing girl out the window, proclaiming something or other about women who love to be chased, when he finally made it to the top of the roof. Upon reaching the roof, he was quickly punted off the 5-story building by Midoriya, much to the shock of the rest of the class. Uraraka giggled again as the sobbing Mineta saved himself from hitting the ground with a last-minute grab at the neighboring building. I can't believe he fell for that. She giggled again as the teen dressed in purple started to rally by climbing up the other side of the building. He was promptly punted off the roof a second time as Izuku sacrificed a shoe to Mineta's sticky quirk. After the third time, Izuku whispered in Uraraka's ear and she promptly nodded and took a spot next to the bomb. With exactly 10 seconds left, Mineta made it to the roof just in time to see Uraraka high-five the bomb. As the bomb rose, Mineta made a desperate dash. He threw down 2 purple balls in front of his feet and prepared to jump off of them to grab the floating bomb. Just before his feet made contact, he found himself pulled back with the yellow capture tape. Izuku had anticipated his move and had come up behind him with the capture tape. The bell for the end of the exercise rang, and Izuku immediately let the boy go. Ignoring the boy's tears, he checked him over for injuries, before nodding and moving down the stairs to find Ojiro and do the same. When the 4 hero students got to the bottom of the stairs, Izuku found his shoes and headed back into the observation room. Izuku knew that their match was probably anticlimactic to watch, but was pleasantly surprised to see the class was still awake when he returned. All Might pulled Izuku aside and whispered, "Why did you kick your classmate off the side of the building?" Izuku looked at him and answered seriously, "His quirk makes him bouncy." All Might just looked at him in exasperation, so Izuku explained. "Recovery Girl gave me a rundown on everyone's medical files so that I would better know how to heal them. Mineta is literally built to bounce. His quirk affects his physiology and makes his skin and muscles react like rubber when he makes contact with blunt objects. His suit is specially designed to monopolize on that fact, and even if it didn't, I would have healed him." At this, All Might promptly sweat dropped, while Jairu and Shoji did their best not to laugh. Mineta had literally turned half the class against him when he started openly drooling about the girls' costumes. All Might coughed awkwardly. "On that note, let's move on," and they did. Izuku had his hands full treating sprains, minor burns and frostbite for the remainder of the class. With the exception of Bakugo, who refused treatment in a huff when he lost to Todoroki and Shoji, everyone benefited from Izuku's healing quirk. Shizenji sat tapping away at her keyboard when Izuku walked in with an emotionless face. "Good afternoon, Recovery Girl," Izuku said as he subtly looked to see if there was anyone else in the infirmary. Curious at the boy's behavior, Shizenji looked around as well as she replied, "Same to you, Midoriya." After confirming there was no one in the infirmary, Izuku looked straight at Recovery Girl and bluntly asked, "Is All Might Yagi Tashinori?" Recovery Girl just sighed, "I knew you would figure it out eventually, but not this soon." "What gave him away?" "He has the exact same injuries as Yagi-san did when I alleviated his pain," Izuku responded. "That was nearly a year ago," Shizenji exclaimed. "It took me 3 hours to recover from the backlash of that healing, and then he trained me on the beach almost daily until the entrance exams," Izuku explained. "I know his pain signature like the back of my hand, especially since I am not able to heal it." "That makes sense," Recovery Girl said. "I will have to inform All Might and the rest of the staff that you know and have you sign a non-disclosure agreement." Izuku nodded. "I figured that would happen, but I wanted to make sure I was correct instead of assuming. I have no qualms about signing the agreement." "All right then," Shizenji said, putting the papers aside. "What did you learn from your healing sessions during battle training?" Shizenji and Izuku spent the rest of the hour reviewing the differences in the students' physiology and how to treat them without the use of his quirk. Afterwards, Izuku headed to the cafeteria for lunch. He was pleasantly surprised when Uraraka and Ida invited him to sit at their table. He was even more surprised when Yaoyorozu came to thank him for his enlightening battle with Mineta. "It is very useful to know that Mineta can bounce. Thank you for sharing that information," she said with a bow before returning to her table. "She and the other girls are plotting revenge against Mineta because he found a way to peep into the girls' locker rooms," Uraraka whispered. "Shouldn't we tell Aizawa-sensei so he can find and block the peephole?" Izuku asked. At the same time, Ida gave a lecture about how inappropriate Mineta's behavior was for a hero. Uraraka just shrugged her shoulders and was about to reply before a loud alarm interrupted their conversation. The students started panicking and crowding into the hallways. Izuku hung back in fear of touching someone and activating his quirk by accident. That was probably why he spotted a taller teen in a black hoodie rush in the opposite direction of the crowd. Izuku tailed him, worried that he had been disoriented in the chaos. He followed the teen to the teacher's lounge before losing him. He opened the door to talk to the teen, but found no one there. Confused, he entered the room and looked around trying to see if anything was out of place. As he looked around, the alarms cut off, so Izuku decided to sit on the small couch and wait for a teacher to return so he could explain the odd occurrence. Snipe was the first one to return, so Izuku relayed the information before heading over to the support classroom for his next class. The rest of the day was fairly normal, with the exception of Hatsum exploding the door off of its hinges before he even had the chance to enter the classroom. The rest of the week flew by as well, with little deviation. Izuku felt more at home in the classroom than he ever had, and would sometimes wonder how long it would last. With Izuku's luck, it was bound to go wrong sometime. After the USJ, Aizawa was sure of one thing and one thing only: Midoriya Izuku was terrifying. His talent and drive were unquestionable, but the way he had that Nomu trembling after healing Eraserhead was irrevocably insane. Apparently, Izuku, Tsuyu, and Mineta had seen the Nomu take down Aizawa and tried to rush to his aid. Tsuyu had almost been decayed by Shigaraki's quirk, but Aizawa was able to stop it in time. Getting his head crushed by the giant Nomu had not been pleasant, but it had been worth it to save his student's life. The next thing he knew, he felt fine, and the Nomu looked like its head had been crushed instead, and in between the two stood an ill-looking Midoriya. Quickly getting to his feet and scanning the area, Aizawa could see that Shigaraki had been captured by Mineta's quirk, and Tsuyu was attempting to keep the smoky guy away from his boss, who was currently throwing a fit. Aizawa returned his attention to his green-haired student and found that the child was touching the Nomu and glowing, and the Nomu was shaking in fear. Aizawa approached Izuku and carefully. "Hey kid," he said in a low, calm voice, "can you tell me what's going on?" Izuku grunted in response. "Gave him your wounds. Now I'm trading fear for regeneration." "Good job, kid," Aizawa assessed. "I'm going to need you to release your quirk so you can help 13, got it?" Izuku shook his head. 13 isn't critical yet." Izuku's voice was strained. "If I let up, this thing will be mobile again. The fear won't keep him down forever. Go help Tsuyu." It was at that moment that Bakugo entered the fray, quickly finding the teleporter's weak spot and pinning him to the ground with death threats as Kirishima kept a lookout. A moment later, All Might showed up, declaring, "I am here," with a disturbingly angry face. In a flash, all the students had been gathered in the plaza with the exception of those on the field with the Nomu. Taking stock of the situation, All Might quickly transported Mineta and Tsuyu before coming to Aizawa and Izuku. "What's going on here?" As Aizawa was explaining, Izuku put out a bare hand to All Might, who immediately took it. Izuku's glow faded as All Might began to glow. A minute later, Izuku let go of both All Might and the beast and promptly collapsed. Aizawa immediately collected the boy and left All Might to take care of the creature. Shigaraki was seeing red, not his usual always want to destroy red, but an incinerate everyone in his immediate vicinity scarlet. That stupid grape had stuck him to the ground and he couldn't even move his hands to decay the stupid sticky ball he was stuck on. He was supposed to kill All Might and move on, but he ended up getting stuck and not even Kurogiri was able to get free. To make matters worse, Eraserhead had come over with the green-haired menace that stopped his Nomu. He smirked when he saw the kid was unconscious. Serves him right for messing with his plans. There was no way he was going to let that chance go to waste. Eraserhead was handing the green-haired boy over to the angry blonde after he had wrapped his capture weapon around Kurogiri's protective collar. The blonde looked repulsed at the idea of carrying his classmate, but snatched him before he could be given to the red-headed boy with the hardening quirk. Eraserhead activated his quirk, and Shigaraki saw his chance. Bakugo was angry. Why did he have to carry the nerd? He wished at least that he was allowed his gauntlets to put an extra layer between his skin and the nerd. The only reason he left his teacher behind was because he had literally seen the man take on a small army just earlier that day. It couldn't have been more than a minute later when he saw the creepy hand guy free himself by literally tearing his shirt off. Aizawa dodged the villain's grab but was unable to keep the misty portal guy in his hold. The pair of villains were immediately surrounded by smoke and reappeared on the side of the field where the battle between the Nomu and All Might was taking place. Grumbling, Bakugo dumped Midoriya next to 13 and turned to watch the fight. All Might hadn't felt this good in years. He didn't know what Midoriya did to relieve the pain, but whatever he did, it was working. He pummeled the Nomu, taking into account its regenerative abilities that Aizawa had mentioned. It seemed to have some kind of shock absorption as well as enormous strength. If he had not been healed by Midoriya, he knew this fight would be more of a struggle than it was. He grabbed the Nomu by the shoulders and tried to slam his head on the ground before he was half surrounded by an inky black cloud. The Nomu roared with the top half of its head popping out of another black hole a few feet away. All Might quickly released the beast and jumped out of the portal before it could close and cut him in half. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see that Shigaraki had somehow freed himself from Mineta's quirk and was trying and failing to land a hit on Aizawa, who was dancing around all of his attacks gracefully. A loud shot rang out in the dome as Snipe landed a hit on Shigaraki's knee. Shigaraki howled in pain and began scratching his neck in frustration. Kurogyari acted quickly, portaling the young man and himself away. All Might got ready to dispel the force from another of the Nomu's punches, but once the portal closed, the beast stopped dead as if it had been switched off. Once All Might was sure the Nomu would no longer move. He sped around the USJ, collecting the students and taking out any threats that were still moving around. These kids had been through a lot. Aizawa went to check on Midoriya once he found the rest of his students were already. He found the boy had woken up and had healed 13 who had long since duct-taped her suit back up. The boy himself seemed listless and exhausted. He spared a glance at Aizawa before allowing himself to succumb to unconsciousness once more. All Might was stunned. He looked at the X-rays with tears in his eyes as he realized just what the boy had done. "He healed me," All Might whispered. "Technically, the Noma healed you," Recovery Girl said as she pored over the data for the third time. "This is a new aspect of the Midoriya's quirk. He can act and a conduit for trading physical attributes from one being to another. If anyone finds out about this, they won't leave him alone," All Might said, quickly switching to a more serious tone. "We must protect that boy." "We already are," Nedzu said as he sipped his tea in the corner. "Luckily, none of the other students really understood what happened when he healed you. They just thought that he was transferring pain he had accumulated from healing others to keep the Nomu suppressed. If Izuku remembers anything when he wakes up, we will have to help him keep this ability secret and out of public view." Nedzu set down his teacup and stood to leave. "I promised his mother I would take care of him. That's what I intend to do." Aizawa slumped into the uncomfortable hospital chair next to his student's bed and sighed. Classes had been cancelled for the rest of the week, allowing him a slight break from his grueling schedule, but Izuku had not yet awoke after pushing himself and his quirk to the limit. Considering that the boy had been able to heal All Might's missing lung and stomach, he figured the kid deserved a rest. He thought back to the emergency meeting Nedzu had had with the staff. The rodent had been downright terrifying when he demanded they keep this ability secret. "Come on, kid, it's been 2 days already," Aizawa mumbled under his breath. The doctors had assured him that the boy was only suffering from exhaustion, but he really hated seeing any of his students in a hospital bed. It made him feel like a failure. As if hearing his quiet demand, Izuku stirred. His bright green eyes slowly opened and he looked over as his teacher. "Sensei?" he asked in a quiet voice. "I'm here, kid," Aizawa said as he pressed the button to summon a nurse. "You're in the hospital for severe quirk exhaustion, but you are okay." Izuku's brows furrowed as if he was trying to remember something, but couldn't. "Something happened at the USJ, right? Is everyone okay?" "Yeah, kid," Aizawa said, trying to ignore the warning bells going off in his head at the kid's lack of memory. "The doctor will be in a little bit to check you over. What do you remember about the USJ?" "Not much," Izuku said as he pushed himself up into a sitting position. "There was a boat, then you were hurt, and All Might was so tired and 13 was hurt. I think I hurt someone or something. I'm not quite sure." Aizawa hummed acknowledgement of the boy's answer as the doctor came in. He quickly asked Izuku some questions and marked down some notes after giving him a checkup. Izuku complied as he became more and more alert of his surroundings. After the hospital staff left, Izuku once more looked at Aizawa. "I hurt that creature, didn't I?" Aizawa returned Izuku's stare without answering. "I gave him my fear and took something from him." "Sensei, what did I take?" Aizawa sighed wearily. He could practically feel the kid's anxiety about this new aspect of his quirk. You took his regenerative ability and gave it to me and to All Might. You saved both of our lives with that trick. Without you, I would almost certainly have died. All Might's lungs and stomach were completely healed. Was the switch permanent, or did I just take the energy of his quirk and transfer it to you both? Izuku asked with a careful expression on his face. The Nomu kept his quirk, but none of the fear you were trading for it. You were just siphoning the energy from his regenerative quirk to yourself and others, Aizawa said. You did light up like a Christmas tree though. Izuku didn't reply, instead bringing his hand up to his chin and mumbling quietly to himself. Aizawa stood up and put his hand on the kid's shoulder. Nedzu is having the staff keep this new development for your quirk under wraps for now. Shizenji will be working with you on it, but for now, you can take it easy. Izuku startled at the gesture from the stoic man, before flashing him a grateful smile. Thanks. Sure, kid. Mineta felt like a hero when he walked into class on Monday. He had been able to capture a villain. It might have only been for a few minutes, but his quirk that had once been ridiculed had been useful. The only reason he had friends at all in middle school was by owning how perverted his quirk could be. After all, as a 4-year-old he had named his own quirk Sticky Ball. Ignorance is bliss, until you are blindsided with it by bullies in the middle school locker room. Shaking those unpleasant thoughts from his mind, he moved the door to the class open and strode in proudly. I am here, Mineta said as he hopped up on the teacher's desk and posed dramatically. Kaminari, arguably his best friend since school started, flashed him a goofy grin with both thumbs up. So, Mineta, the blonde said. So you told us you helped keep a villain down. Nice job, man. Mineta preened under Kaminari's attention. It was nothing, Mineta smirked as he brushed some imaginary dust off of his uniform. I saw an opportunity and I took it, that's all. Tsuyu just rolled her eyes and went back to her conversation with Hagakure. Mineta had been extremely useful in restraining the villain, but only because Aizawa had managed to erase his quirk and Mineta had tried to punch the villain with his quirk out of pure fear. The snot had not been pretty, and that was coming from a girl who could secrete mucus from her pores. Shut up and sit down, you are wasting time, Aizawa said when he pushed open the door to begin class. Tsuyu raised her hand. What? The grumpy teacher said as he stared Tsuyu down. Where's Midoriya? Tsuyu asked as she tilted her head to the side. Her fellow green-haired classmate had not come in yet, and she was worried that he was still hurt from the USJ incident. Midoriya is fine, Aizawa said in a bored tone. His schedule has changed slightly, so he will be in a different class until hero training. You'll see him then. If you have any more questions, ask him when you see him. For now though, we need to focus on something more important. The students leaned forward in tense anticipation of his next sentence. The school sports festival is coming up, you'll need to prepare. A sigh of relief swept through the students. Principal Nedzu has decided to continue with this event despite our recent troubles. Plus Ultra and all that. Yaoyorozu, you are in charge of organizing practice slots for the gyms, good night. That said, Aizawa swiftly slid into his sleeping bag and fell back asleep. Chaos resumed as the class began to clamor excitedly over how to prepare for the sports festival. Uraraka, meanwhile, glanced at Midoriya's empty desk with a small frown. She knew he was okay, he had been texting her and Ida since he woke up, but she still worried. Her thoughts were interrupted by Ida's loud reprimand for order, and her thoughts turned to the festival. Midoriya had never been so busy in his life. With the festival coming up, there had been so many extra patients in the infirmary that he had been using his quirk without a break for almost an entire week. He had no idea how Recovery Girl did it day in and day out. The only breaks were during heroics and Nedzu's special lessons. Izuku practically crashed in his room once the day was done with only enough energy to call his mom. She had been beside herself with worry when she heard the news about the USJ, but Izuku had convinced her that he should stay at UA despite her misgivings. His father had been released nearly a month ago, but neither his mother nor Izuku had seen hide nor hair of him. It was almost as if the man had just disappeared. That suited Izuku just fine though, and it reassured his mom that he was still safe under UA's care. After Inko had hung up, Izuku heard a soft knock on his door. Izuku opened it to find Uraraka and Ida standing there with sheepish expressions on their faces. "What's up?" Izuku said with a smile. It felt like it had been a long time since he had actually seen his friends. "Uraraka and I just wanted to check up on you and make sure you were all right," Ida said seriously as he made chopping motions with his hands. "And we might need some help." The last part was said with an embarrassed cough. Izuku blinked in surprise and held open the door for his friends. "Wow," Uraraka said, "look at all of these posters. You must really love heroes." Izuku chuckled and shuffled from one foot to another nervously. It had been years since he had let any peers in his room. "Yeah," Izuku said as he rubbed his arms subconsciously. "It's all I've ever wanted to be. What do you need help with?" Ida stood up straighter and bowed low. "We are very sorry for intruding, but I need your help with my engines." Izuku took a closer look at Ida with his quirk focused on the teen. Aside from some exhaustion, Izuku couldn't see anything that needed to be healed. "I don't see anything wrong with them. Is there something in particular bothering you? You can see injuries?" Uraraka said as she turned to look at the blushing teen. "Ah, yes," Izuku said, "it's part of my quirk." Ida blushed and bowed again before very loudly declaring, "I'm sorry for lying. We just wanted to hang out with you and couldn't figure out a way to get past Aizawa-sensei without saying we wanted you to help us with a training injury." Izuku blinked in surprise while he tried to process what Ida had just said, before bursting into tears. "What's wrong?" Uraraka asked, instinctively reaching out to Izuku, who put up his hands to wipe away the tears. "I'm sorry," Izuku said between sobs. "It's just been a while since someone wanted to hang out with me. I thought you would find me scary or something." "Why would we ever find you scary?" Ida said, flabbergasted at the boy's words. "I wasn't there or the majority of USJ, but I heard nothing but good things about your actions from the students who saw you. You healed our teachers and helped stall the villain until help arrived. If anything, you gained the respect of your peers and the staff." Uraraka nodded along to Ida's rant before adding, "Plus, the sports festival is keeping everyone busy. We should have come to hang out with you sooner." Izuku's tears slowed and the boy gave the pair a blinding smile that made both students blush. "You're right. I shouldn't have assumed. Sorry for crying." "It's all right," Uraraka said, fighting a blush as Ida clapped a hand on Izuku's shoulder in a friendly gesture. "So who's your favorite hero?" Izuku wiped away the last of his tears and the trio fell into a comfortable conversation until Aizawa came to escort Uraraka and Ida to the front gates. But Kogu stomped his way to the front of the podium when it was his turn to give a speech. "I'm gonna win," he declared brashly as he glared the entirety of the first years down. He saw the defiance and outrage on some faces but grimaced when he saw Izuku's fond expression pointed towards him. He didn't know why the nerd was even there. He could no longer deny the kid was a good healer after he healed their teachers at the USJ, but that didn't mean he was no longer dangerous. He knew what that stupid Deku had done to his dad. He felt the familiar rage bubbling under his skin when he thought about Uncle Hisashi. The man had been nothing but nice to Katsuki and his family. He would never in a million years have thought he was hurting Izuku and Auntie Inko. When Izuku disappeared and Uncle Hisashi had been on trial, Katsuki felt like his entire world had been flipped upside down. Uncle Hisashi was a hero. He would never hurt his family. Then they started accusing him of rigging fights, embezzling funds from his charities, and bribing conspirators. It was clear that someone was setting him up. Katsuki was convinced that Izuku and Inko were in danger until he overheard his parents talking about the trial when they thought he was asleep. They thought that Inko had set Hisashi up, but then argued about how it didn't make sense. When Izuku had finally returned and told Katsuki what his quirk was, Katsuki was sure. Izuku had somehow traded his father's goodness for someone else's evil. Izuku was the one to blame. Then, as if he felt guilty, he went around trying to save everyone, even the extras who didn't deserve it. It was as if he was trying to make Katsuki the evil one. Katsuki wasn't going to let that fly. So he fought. He was the one everyone looked up to. He let everyone know who Izuku's father was. He made sure no one would take the nerd seriously. It worked until Izuku became a healer. A healer that could supposedly carve your mind into whatever he wanted. Forget that. Bakugo had to tread carefully after the suicide baiting, but he still had to take Izuku down a few pegs. To do that he would have to establish himself as top dog so the extras would take his warning seriously. He was going to win and save everyone by being number one, just like All Might. Izuku watched the sports festival from Recovery Girl's infirmary. Nedzu and Aizawa had told him they would allow him to take part, but only if he felt comfortable with the publicity. Izuku had declined. His mother was still worried, and he knew that publicizing his presence would not help her fears. So he took the out he was given, and opted to help Shizenji in the infirmary. He watched his friends in awe as they fought tooth and nail to win. The infirmary was flooded with peers who had quirk exhaustion, but nothing too serious. Recovery Girl shooed Izuku off to eat lunch with his friends when Ida and Uraraka came to grab him. Izuku parted with a smile and sat down to shovel his bowl of castuden into his mouth before he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. Turning, Izuku caught sight of Todoroki. "What's wrong?" Izuku asked as he looked into the boy's emotionless face. "Why aren't you participating?" Todoroki asked. Izuku was asked to help Recovery Girl in the infirmary. Ida replied when Izuku became flustered. Todoroki let his hand fall but kept his gaze trained on Izuku. "Shame, I was hoping to fight you." Izuku was about to say something when they were interrupted by Bakugo stomping over while loudly swearing. "You should be wanting to fight me half and half." Izuku instinctively shrunk away from the explosive boy before he caught himself. Todoroki caught the action and his gaze became even colder as he turned to face his angry classmate. "You and I are already going to fight in the tournament. Why should I seek you out?" Bakugo's grin turned feral at the response before he turned to Izuku, "Shove off, villain." Izuku frowned as he looked at his childhood friend. Uraraka let out a shocked gasp while Ida tried to lecture Bakugo on manners. Bakugo just scoffed and walked off. Honestly, Uraraka huffed as she pouted. "What's his problem?" "I wish I knew. Kaken and I grew up together," Izuku said as he stared down at his bowl which seemed unappetizing now. "He doesn't really like me very much. Can I speak to you alone for a moment?" Todoroki asked. Izuku had forgotten he was there and was momentarily startled by his question. "Sure," Izuku said as he picked up his bowl to toss in a trash can. "I'll catch up to you guys later. Good luck on your matches." Todoroki led Izuku out to a quiet corridor and asked, "Does Bakugo hit you?" Izuku's eyes shot up in surprise and he started stammering. "Look," Todoroki said, "I get it. You don't want to get him in trouble, but you shouldn't let him bully you." "It's been taken care of," Izuku said looking Todoroki straight in the eye. "He hasn't tried anything since we've started high school, and the teachers know the situation." "How did you know?" "Do you remember when we were little and Azar got put in jail for child abuse among other things?" Todoroki said looking away. He missed Izuku's hands clenching as he fought to keep the fear off of his face. "It was a wake-up call of sorts for my father Endeavor. When my quirk came in early, he started to train me to surpass All Might. His methods were brutal and definitely along the lines of abuse. It took my mother snapping and pouring boiling water on my fireside for him to see what he was doing to his family. My aunt took us in while Mom got better, but I will never forget what it felt like to be on the receiving end of that hostility. Even now, I refuse to use my fire because it reminds me of him." He looked up at Izuku who was staring back at him with an understanding look. "Look, Todoroki, Izuku replied. "I know how it feels to be afraid of your quirk. The first time I used mine, I nearly sent a man into a coma, but not using it only hurts you. You know I can see injuries as part of my quirk, right?" Todoroki nodded. "I can tell you that if you continue to fight with only half of your quirk, your health will decline. Your internal organs cannot take the stress of the temperature changes your body goes through if you only use your ice. It would be the same if you only used your fire. That aside, you need to own your fire. It doesn't belong to your father. It belongs to you. If there is some kind of emotional block that you need to work through, that's fine, but holding back and hiding your talents really only hurts you in the end." Todoroki's eyes opened wider as he took in Izuku's determined gaze and words, then he chuckled. "Here I thought I was helping you, and you turn it around and try to help me instead. I'll keep your words in mind." Todoroki pushed off of the wall he was leaning on and headed back towards the arena. Izuku watched him leave with a complicated expression on his face before heading towards the infirmary. Hagakure watched the boys leave and thanked her lucky stars for those stealth lessons that Aizawa-sensei had given her for training. It seemed neither of them noticed her. Usually, she couldn't get past Izuku's eyes, but his distraction lent itself to her aid. She never would have guessed Todoroki had that kind of past. She had thought he was just quiet by nature. Midoriya, on the other hand, it was obvious the boy had been bullied. She heard the whispers about his scars in the locker room. He had explained to some of the pushier kids that his scars were from healing people while he was training his quirk. She had accepted that, but there were several starburst-shaped scars that seemed suspiciously like Bakugu's trademark explosions. They had been revealed during hero training when he had lost part of his clothing to Mineta's quirk in a spar. It was a relief to know that the teachers knew about the bullying, but it was still hard to hear about such a rough past. She resolved then and there to make sure that both boys would know they were loved. Now she just had to get the rest of the class in on it. The matches began in earnest. Izuku had never been so grateful for a contestant with a mental quirk. Any match the general education student took part in ended painlessly in mere moments. The rest of the battles were riddled with injuries. Not so many that they would overwhelm Recovery Girl and Izuku, but enough to put a dent in their stamina. It was right after Tokoyami and Yaoyorozu's match that Ida came bursting into the infirmary in tears. "Please," Ida said in tears as he grabbed Izuku's shoulders. "Please help my brother." Izuku looked to Recovery Girl, who hobbled over to the boy and led him to a chair. "What's wrong with your brother, boy?" Shizenji asked gently. Ida took a deep breath as he fought back tears. "Stain got him. They found him in time to save his life, but his legs, they won't work anymore. Izuku, you can trade my health for his right? Please, please save my brother." Recovery Girl smacked the boy with her cane, catching his attention. "You listen here, boy. You have no right to ask that of Izuku or your brother. He's still alive, right? He should have a say in whether or not he wants his little brother to give up his future for him, don't you think?" Ida sobbed harder at her words. "Let's go see him," Izuku said. "I can't regrow something that wouldn't regrow naturally, but at the very least I can alleviate the pain with a doctor's supervision. Where there's life, there's hope." Ida nodded, his words failing him as Izuku patted his back. The shorter boy then helped the taller one up and walked to the entrance with him. "Izuku, keep in mind the doctor's oath refers to yourself as well," Recovery Girl said somberly as the boys reached the door. "I know," Izuku said with a sad smile before exiting. They hailed a cab and headed to Hosu General Hospital. Shinso stood at the top of the winner's podium and smiled a true, genuine smile. The dream he had dared to dream had finally come true. He could be a hero student. No stupid robots could stop him now. All Might hung the first-place medal on Shinso's neck and congratulated him. Shinso beamed. Bakugu was going to kill him. Not only had he lost, but he had been controlled by A at $$ and $ing brainwashing Quirk. It enraged him even more than Todoroki's half-hearted attempt at using his fire. The only bright side to this whole fiasco was that he hadn't seen Deku since lunch. Todoroki looked at his hands despondently as he thought about the fight with Bakugu. He had summoned his fire at the last moment. His quirk had reacted naturally to the boy's concussive explosions. It had felt like he was back in his father's dojo, about to get pummeled into the tatami mats that was already soaked with his sweat. His fire had flared in a last-ditch effort for the boy to protect himself from a man who wasn't even there. He heard Izuku's words rattling around in his head. "Own your power. It belongs to you." He needed to talk to his mother. She would know what to do. Nedzu put down the phone and sighed. Recovery Girl had just told him the situation with Ida. He knew something like this would come up eventually, but he had hoped it wouldn't happen so soon. Picking up the receiver again, he called Midnight and sent her to the hospital after the boys. He and Recovery Girl had drilled into his head not to try to perform a healing he did not have the resources for, but he knew the kid too well. His compassion was his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. Midnight entered the hospital room with bated breath to find Ida's family hugging an emotionless Izuku. She cursed the fact that she was too late to stop the healing. If what she heard was true, The kids would have no emotions for the next few hours at the very least. Tensei looked up at the visitor and beamed. Midnight? He yelled enthusiastically from his hospital bed. What are you doing here? She smiled as she saw his feet move, as he twisted to face her. I'm here to pick up Izuku. He used his quirk on you, huh? Tensei beamed. Sure did, Tensei said as he wiggled his toes. He couldn't heal it all the way, but he healed me enough to be able to heal on my own. He has an amazing quirk. Midnight smiled as if she were a proud mother. You bet he does. I need to take him home now though. Come on, Midoriya. She held her hand out to him. The boy stared at it for a moment before grabbing it with his bare hand. When Midnight realized that, she quickly scanned the room for his gloves. Ida caught her gaze before realizing what she was looking for. Quickly he retrieved the gloves and handed them to Izuku, who replaced them robotically. I can't thank you enough, Ida said as he grabbed the Izuku's gloved hands in his own. Izuku stared at him apathetically but nodded in acknowledgement. Ida dropped his hands and followed Midnight out of the hospital room. They left quietly, not noticing the tall man in a business suit that followed their departure with curious eyes. What did you sacrifice? Midnight asked as she shut the door of her car. Emotions and stamina, Izuku replied robotically as he turned his gaze to her. You must be exhausted, Midnight said as she backed out of her parking spot. Recovery Girl demanded I take you straight to her when we return so she could give you a health assessment. I kept my promise to her, Izuku said, staring at his gloved hands. I didn't let the instinct to heal everything take over, and I didn't hurt myself to help him. Midnight hummed her acknowledgement of Izuku's statement as she merged into traffic. How long until your emotions come back? She asked. Like most of the staff, she had been informed of the specifics of his quirk, but had never been there to witness his recovery process. Nedzu had most likely chosen her to pick him up in case the return of his emotions became too overwhelming. It's not as bad as All Might's, so probably an hour, Izuku said quietly. I might fall asleep before then. My mother said I sleep talk when I fall asleep after a healing, so just ignore me unless I go feral. Midnight traded any dirty jokes she would have normally made with that comment with a quiet hum. Do you want me to knock you out for a bit? She asked. Yes, please, Izuku replied, already closing his eyes and relaxing back into the chair. Midnight smiled and released a small portion of her quirk, letting the boy fall into a deeper slumber than he probably would have had otherwise. It didn't take long for the sleep talking to start. Midnight nearly swerved out of her lane in shock when she heard Izuku let out a long string of curses. She had to suppress a chuckle when she heard his extensive list of expletives. If it wasn't confirmed before, it was now. He has definitely grown up with Bakugo Katsuki. That boy could swear like a sailor. The swearing lasted for almost 10 minutes before it turned into whimpers. Midnight was tempted to pull the car over and comfort the boy through the tears that were welling up in her own eyes. Please stop hurting, Mom, I'll be good. Dad, it hurts, what did I do wrong? Kaken, please stop. If she had doubted Azar's guilt before, she didn't now. She was relieved when the sobs stopped and were replaced with giggles and laughter, closely followed by a string of love confessions to anything and anyone he had seen in the last few hours. It took about 30 minutes before Izuku stopped sleep talking and started quietly snoring. It took another 30 minutes for Midnight to return to UA. Aizawa met them in the parking lot along with Nedzu and Recovery Girl. Aizawa deftly unbuckled the gangly teen and carried him to Recovery Girl's office as Midnight tagged along. Aizawa laid the boy down on a cot and watched as Shizenji started fussing over the boy. You saw it? Aizawa said as he looked at the tear tracks running down Midnight's face. The BDSM hero just nodded silently before looking at Aizawa with a pitiful look. Aizawa wordlessly held out his arm to let his old friend hide the new bout of tears running down her face in his shoulder. He's just always so happy. Midnight cried. Why did this have to happen to him? Why does it have to happen to any of them? He's just hiding so much hurt. I haven't felt this powerless since Oboro. Aizawa just listened silently as he brushed her hair with his fingers. Recovery Girl gave herself a satisfied nod as she finished her tests. She locked eyes with Aizawa and gave him a relieved nod. Aizawa found himself returning the expression. I'll watch over Izuku while you take Namuri home. At the sound of her name, Midnight took a deep breath and relinquished Aizawa's shoulder. I'll be fine. Take care of your kid. Aizawa shot her a worried look. Oh, don't look at me like that. I might take it as an invitation to climb into bed with you. If she can crack jokes like that, she'll be fine, Aizawa said as he rolled his eyes and moved to Izuku's bed to pick him up once again. Here are the results of internship offers, Aizawa said with a bored expression as he pushed a button on his remote. Those who did not receive offers have a list of 30 agencies willing to take interns from UA. Make a list of your top 4 choices, your reasons for choosing them, and turn them in by the end of tomorrow. Yaoyorozu, come pass out the offers. I'm going to sleep. The class broke into excited whispers as they flipped through their lists. Uraraka immediately picked up her pile and went over to Midoriya's desk. I got a lot more than I expected to, especially since I lost to Bakugo, Uraraka said as she placed her pile on Midoriya's desk. Well, you made a good showing, you just ran out of stamina in the end, Midoriya said with a smile. Even making it through the obstacle course should get you an offer or two. I guess you're right, Uraraka said. You know a lot about heroes, right? Oh, Izuku said with a blush. Yeah, why? Which of these offers would help me get better at combat? Uraraka said. Oh, I see you want to be able to both rescue and defend, Izuku said enthusiastically taking the stack from her. Your quirk is great for both. Uraraka blushed at the unexpected praise as Izuku shuffled through the pile quietly mumbling to himself. Here, these the heroes that are combat-oriented, he said handing her a pile. These are the all-arounders, he handed her another pile. And these are the rescue-oriented heroes. Well, thanks, Uraraka said taking the separated piles. Where are you going to intern? I am interning at an ER in Hosu, Izuku said. I helped out there the other night, and they decided to extend an offer to me. Why aren't you interning with a hero agency? Uraraka asked. ER is affiliated with Ingenium's agency. They provide emergency assistance when the agency's own staff isn't enough, Izuku said. After the USJ, I wanted to focus more on how to efficiently spread my healing resources in times of crises. Plus, they will have a larger range of patients I can heal with varying body types and ages. Wow, that's so cool, Uraraka said. She was about to say more when she heard Ida cough behind her. Excuse me, Ida said. But can I borrow Midoriya for a moment? Oh, sure, Uraraka said. Alone if possible, Ida said with an embarrassed blush. Oh, of course, Uraraka said in surprise. I'll just head back to my seat. Thanks again, Midoriya. No problem, Izuku said as he waved. So Ida, what did you need? I wanted to thank you once again for what you did for my brother, Ida said bowing at a perfect 90-degree angle. That's not necessary, Izuku said. Please stand up. No, I also wanted to apologize, Ida said from his uncomfortable position. As Recovery Girl said, I had no right to ask that of you. It was selfish of me. Ida, Midoriya said blushing at the attention the boy was garnering from the rest of the class. He put a hand on the boy's shoulder. It's all right. Ida looked up at Izuku to see a sincere smile and a faint blush of embarrassment. I would have done it whether or not you asked. I am always glad to help a friend. Ida promptly began to cry as he held Izuku's hand. You are the best friend anyone could ask for, Midoriya. He shouted in between his sobs, causing several classmates to come and check if he was all right. Izuku just laughed awkwardly and said, Call me Izuku. Of course, Ida said standing up and wiping his tears. Call me Tenya. Izuku nodded and laughed with a genuinely blinding smile. Bakugo seethed as he watched the exchange from across the room. Whoa, Kirishima said. I don't know what Izuku did, but it must have been really something if he got Ida to cry. Teach, Bakugo said as he turned away from the scene. The nerd doesn't know how to do anything but hurt. Ida's going to be crying soon enough. Whoa bro, Kirishima said. That's not cool. I notice you always refuse healing when he's the one doing it. What do you have against Midoriya? None of your business, Bakugo barked as he returned to his pile of offers. Kirishima shrugged and looked at his own pile. Todoroki looked over at the blonde and the redhead with curiosity. What about the shy green-headed boy could have Bakugu so afraid? Before he could think about it any farther, Hagakure came over. Todoroki-san, who are you picking for your internship? The stoic boy blinked in surprise. In the 2 months since school had started, no one had tried to talk to him aside from Yaoyorozu and Izuku. He wasn't great at starting conversations either, so the fact that one of the most excitable girls in the class was talking to him out of the blue was rather confusing. I'm interning with Endeavor, Todoroki said, adjusting his gaze so it was where he imagined her eyes might have been. What about you? Todoroki listened as the girl chattered on about her choices. It was comfortable, almost like listening to Fuyumi chatter about her college classes while their aunt made dinner in the kitchen. Hagakure was thrilled. Step 1 in her and Aoyama's Let Todoroki and Izuku loved plan was a success. It was rather surprising that Ida had a waterworks show, but Izuku seemed delighted to have a friend that would call him by his first name. Todoroki was the one she was more worried about, but it seemed the boy was a little more shy than standoffish as his stoic demeanor would suggest. If she didn't know better, she would even say he enjoyed listening to her chatter. She couldn't wait until internships were over for Phase 2. Izuku was certainly not expecting to be in an alleyway at any time that night, so how the heck did he get here? His internship had started out normal enough. It had been exciting to work in a real hospital. Dr. Chiseiji, the director, had been nothing but kind as he informed Izuku of hospital protocols and ER patients. The ER was blessedly slow, at least it was until Nomus began to fly around the city. Patients started coming in left and right. There was no time to rest. Izuku scurried around the ER distributing bandages, ointments, gloves and the like wherever they were needed. About 30 minutes in, the hero native had asked for a field medic to help him with a down patient. Dr. Chiseiji had grabbed Izuku's shoulder and pushed him to the forefront. We can't spare any staff on the field, but this intern should be able to keep your friend stable until help can get there, Dr. Chiseiji said. Remember your training, you can do this. With that, the doctor was gone to see another patient, and Izuku ran after Native. The building collapsed under the heat of Endeavor's flames and trapped a few citizens, Native explained as they ran towards the building. It seems like they are a young couple. I stabilized the building, but they are too large to make it out of the small opening I was able to find to get them out. Do you know their quirks? Izuku asked as they found the scene. I've come back with help. Native yelled and crouched in front of the small opening. Izuku crouched with the hero and peered into the shadows. They were responsive when I came to get you. Native said, panicking when they received no answer in return. Izuku put a calm hand on Native's shoulder and moved him aside to take a look. If they were alive and hurt, Izuku should be able to pick up their pain signatures. I can't see any vital signs, Izuku said, his heart clenching painfully as he pulled a flashlight out of his bag. Flicking it on, he shone it down into the hole Native had led him to, praying he wouldn't find bodies. Finding no one, and no other way out, Izuku let out a sigh of relief. It looks like they got out. I don't see any bodies, and no other Ixen. Izuku stopped as he turned around to find that Native had vanished. On alert, Izuku stood and assessed his surroundings. There had been a Nomo battle in the area, but Manuel was there with his crew, putting out the fires the fight had caused. Izuku ran up to him. Manuel, he said. Have you seen Native? I was helping him find a patient, but then he disappeared. The normal hero looked at Izuku's hero outfit and looked around. No, Manuel replied, then looked over his shoulder. Ida, have you? My intern is missing as well. Ida Tenya was your intern? I go to school with him. You take care of the fire, Izuku said. I'll see if I can't find them. All right, Manuel said, but be careful. Call for help if you need it. Izuku nodded and started moving away. The only way Ida would have left his post was if he saw something was wrong elsewhere. Izuku mumbled as he began searching the area close by. Wait, Izuku stopped for a moment as his body turned cold at the thought of Stain being in Hosu. If he saw Stain, there's no way he wouldn't have gone after him. Same for Native. Let's see, Stain's attacks have always taken place at night in the alleyways. Alright, let's check there first. If I can get to the rooftops, it will be easier to scan the area. Having made a plan of action, Izuku scaled the closest building that was not currently on fire and prayed as he quickly jumped from roof to roof looking for the hero and his classmate. 2 alleyways away from the fire, Izuku spotted them. Native was unconscious, slumped against the wall and paralyzed, but not overly injured. Ida was face down about to be impaled by a worn katana. Quick as a thought, Izuku dug out the tranquilizer gun he had commissioned from the support department and took his shot. The hero killer jumped back, just barely missing the tranquilizer dart that was aimed at his chest. Cursing, Izuku pulled out his cell phone and sent out an SOS to the hero line, leaving his phone on so the encounter was recorded regardless of the outcome. Well, what do we have here? Stain asked as he spotted Izuku from his rooftop. You shouldn't butt into things you don't understand, the bandaged man sneered at the green-haired youth. I think I understand plenty well that you were just about to impale my friend with your weapon, Izuku said, standing tall. Hoping against hope the other heroes got there in time. How did you paralyze them? Izuku! Ida yelled with tears of frustration in his eyes. Run now. That's Stain, the one who hurt Tensei. Oh, Stain said, his eyes darkening considerably as he hears Ida's yelling. So you do know the fake hero in training. What makes him fake? Izuku asks as he jumps to the fire escape below, praying to keep Stain's eyes on him until the pros get there. The longer he can get him to talk, the more time the heroes have to make it. He left his post to chase after the ideal of revenge, Stain said. Are you sure? Izuku asked, tilting his head as if he was curious while subtly pulling out a smoke grenade filled with Midnight's Quirk essence to use if the talking didn't give the other heroes time to get there. How do you know he didn't just see you hurting a hero and come to help? Are you that naive? Stain asked, gripping his blade a little tighter. I knew from the moment he barreled around the corner this was poor Ingenium's little brother. Why else would he be in the area? Izuku, please, just run. Tenya pleaded. He was terrified that the healer would be killed right in front of his eyes. The greenette just shot him a calming smile as he continued to talk to the serial killer. How was he supposed to know that Native was paralyzed? Izuku asked, keeping his eyes trained on Stain. Your quirk isn't public knowledge. He could have assumed Native was just down for a moment. If he got it made a distraction and allowed Native to run, he would have been heroic in his actions, correct? Huh, Stain laughed as he walked back over to the fallen student. He didn't even see Native lying there. He only saw me. I could feel the bloodlust when he laid eyes on me. Tenya? Izuku asked, for the first time addressing his friend. Is that true? All I could think of when I saw him was how much he hurt my brother, Tenya said, squeezing his eyes shut to avoid the look of disappointment on his friend's face. I wanted to stop him from doing that ever again. It seems like a case of mixed motives to me, Stain, Izuku said, staring into the red eyes that were still burning with the intent to kill. He acted out of anger, but for a heroic reason. That would prove he's got heroic potential, wouldn't you say? It's not enough to have potential, Stain said as he moved back towards the boy and raised his katana once more. He has just as much potential to be corrupted by his anger. How many victims will he create from his anger and fear before he starts actually living up to his true potential for good? Izuku knew there was no more time. Pulling up his gas mask, he threw the grenade and smoke began to fill the narrow alleyway. Stain immediately tried to cover his nose with the scarf, and Izuku jumped down to scoop Tenya in his arms. Thank goodness for moving refrigerators with all might and Mirio, or he doesn't think he would have been able to pick the teen up at all. With a roar, Stain drove his katana into the pavement where Tenya had been only moments before as Izuku ran towards the road. Realizing his quarry was no longer where he left it, Stain jumped up the wall. This allowed him to get out of the smoke's range and try to find where his prey went. He spotted movement in the fog and immediately threw a dagger only to hear it clang to the ground as if it had hit a wall. As the smoke cleared, Stain saw he had indeed thrown his dagger into a wall of ice, and he was alone with the flame hero Endeavor. Todoroki grunted as he ran with Native in his arms. If his dad hadn't been so obsessed with hunting the hero killer down, he wouldn't have been there in time to see the class rep being princess carried by the tiny green healer. Nor would he have been able to block the knife about to hit the pair as they ran out of the alley. Seeing the hero native on the ground, he had quickly scooped the man up in his arms and followed Midoriya and Ida towards a more public area. He wasn't really worried about his father. Todoroki almost ran into Izuku when the teen abruptly stopped and set Ida down on the ground. "You can put him down now. We should be safe here," Izuku said to Todoroki, who nodded and put native down. "Are they hurt?" Todoroki asked Midoriya as the healer looked the two men over. "They should be fine," Izuku said as he grabbed some bandages from his utility belt. "It looks like Stain's paralytic is wearing off, and they are currently asleep thanks to Midnight Smoke Bomb. Native will have a nasty bruise on his ribs. I'm more worried about Ida's hand. He will have to have his hand x-rayed before I try to heal it. If anything is missing, I will make it worse. All I can do for him right now is wrap it to staunch the bleeding. Will your dad be all right?" Todoroki was about to reply, when Burnbright, one of Endeavor's sidekicks, found them. Quickly, she called up an ambulance and ushered the teens back to the ER. Shigaraki smirked as he watched Endeavor barbecue Stain. "Serves the BSTRD right for stabbing him." Kurogyri made an interested hum, catching Shigaraki's attention. "What do you see, Kurogyri?" "I think I see the student that kept the Nomu down," Kurogyri said. "Where?" Tamura said, looking in the direction he saw Kurogyri looking. "Ah," Tamura said as he spotted the bushy green hair of the student getting into the back of the ambulance. "It is him. I hate that kid. He doesn't know when to give up." "Should I make things interesting then?" Kurogyri said. "No," Shigaraki said with a wicked smile. "Sensei has something in store for the brat already. I can't wait to see it." "Very well," Kurogyri said before opening a portal back to the bar. "I think that's enough for the night, don't you? We still need to get that stab wound looked at." Shigaraki scoffed and entered the portal. "We really need a healer," he mumbled as the portal closed behind them. Tuya and Toga sat on the edge of their seats as the newscasters reported the breaking story. In the midst of the League of Villains attacking Hosu, Stain had been captured and brought into custody by the flame hero Endeavor. Stain, otherwise known as Kaizome Agakur, has allegedly murdered over 20 pro-heroes and maimed 12 sidekicks on his killing rampage that lasted the better part of 2 months. The community mourns the loss of these heroes even as they are grateful the killer is behind bars. Tuya stood and kicked over the small table as he carded his hands through his black-dyed hair in frustration. Of course it was freaking Endeavor. He yelled. "Has he not tormented me enough? I can't believe they locked up Stainy." Toga pouted. "I hate your dad. Don't call that man my father," Tuya said, sighing and flopping back on the couch. "I renounced him the moment he left me for dead." "Oh, you mean that time where you almost burnt up from training?" Toga asked, picking some dirt from her fingernails with a knife. "I wish you would have at least kept some scars. I bet you would have looked real good all beat up like that." Tuya looked down at his unblemished skin with a thoughtful frown. It had been about a week after he had stumbled out of the ashes that used to be his training hall that the only miracle in his miserable life occurred. After the accident, he found himself utterly alone in a pile of ashes. When he realized no one was there to help him, he knew with absolute certainty his father had left him for dead. He shuddered thinking about how he had spent so much time seeking his approval only to be thrown away once the family genius began showing promise. He had just started walking, hoping someone would find him and help him. A week passed and no one did. Tuya finally collapsed from exhaustion in an alleyway behind a local grocery store. He didn't know how long he had laid there, but the next thing he knew he felt cool hands caressing his forehead, and all the pain vanished, as if it had been a dream. When he opened his eyes he saw a young child and his mother with 2 pairs of the most luminescent green eyes he had ever seen stared at him. The younger boy immediately gave him a hug and started babbling about how much he loved the teen and that he could come with them and they would take care of them. The woman looked like she was trying to suppress a chuckle as she peeled the young boy off of Tuya. "Izuku used his quirk to heal you. Don't worry about the gushing, it's a side effect of his quirk," the woman said as the boy turned to hug her just as he had hugged Tuya moments before. "Do you need me to call someone for you? You were awfully hurt. If you need a place to stay for the night, you are more than welcome to come with us." At the woman's words, Tuya shook his head and stood up after brushing himself off. "No thank you. I got separated from my friends and ended up overusing my quirk. I'll be going now. Tuya knelt down so he was eye to eye with the younger boy. Thank you for healing me. The little boy's eyes lit up in delight and he giggled as he gave the teen a tight hug. You're welcome. I love you. Feel better. The boy nuzzled in closer until the woman finally took pity on the teen and peeled the boy off of him. As soon as he was free, Tuya waved the pair off and briskly walked in the opposite direction. He looked down at what remained of his clothes from the fire. His pants were thankfully intact, but his shirt was only a little better than tatters. Grunting, he tore the fabric off and tossed it in a nearby dumpster. He probably should have accepted the woman's offer, but she would have figured out who he was eventually, and he didn't want to go back. Besides, he never would have met Toga otherwise. As his memories settled, he looked at the blonde girl sitting on the couch of the beaten-down apartment they shared. She was crazy, that was undeniable, but aside from a rather unsettling lust for blood, she was just a lost girl, much like he was. It would be harder to hide if I had those scars, Tuya finally said. It's not like I haven't gotten plenty of other scars, some of them are even your work. Toga smiled like a Cheshire cat at the mention of the scars. Like I said, you look better with scars, you bleed so well. You think the League of Villains was really working with Stain? Tuya asked, ignoring her comment. He's never mentioned working with a group. I thought he was more of a lone wolf. Who cares? Toga asked. If they want to carry on his work while he's in prison, we might as well join them, don't you think? It could be fun, like having a family again. What? Tuya joked. I'm not enough for you? You won't let me cut you, Toga pouted. I need more blood to stay sane, you know that. All right, fine, Tuya said. We'll have Jiren introduce us tomorrow. Hooray! Toga said as she gave Tuya a hug. It was an often enough occurrence that Dabi just gave the girl a fond sigh and a pat on the back. He really didn't know what he would have done without her. He certainly wouldn't be doing as well as he was now. Adopting a fellow runaway with a transformation quirk had been the best thing he had ever done. Izuku sighed as he finally made it home. Dr. Chiseiji had taken one look at the patients the teen had brought in and told him he had the rest of the night off. Victims from the fires had finally stopped trickling in for the night. Luckily, there had been quite a few rescue heroes in the area that prevented a lot of civilian injuries and casualties. That meant he had to wait for one of the teachers to show up so they could question him. Eventually, Vlad King had showed up in his casual clothes. It had been majorly awkward seeing how Izuku had never really interacted with the man. He seemed to have some sort of problem or rivalry with Aizawa. Izuku had steered clear, not wanting to get caught up in teacher drama. Vlad King had simply made sure he was all right and escorted him silently back to the dorms. Izuku had bowed and thanked the man. Vlad had been about to say something, but instead had simply turned around and left. Too tired to think of anything else, Izuku made it to his room and crashed on the bed, falling asleep without even bothering to change his clothes. The next day, Izuku was awakened by several loud knocks on the door. Groaning, the teen rolled out of bed to answer the door. Cementos stood there with Principal Nedzu perched on his shoulder. Good morning, young one, Nedzu said cheerfully as his tail swished from side to side. We heard you had quite the eventful day yesterday. Izuku yawned as he stepped to the side to let the pair enter his room. Izuku always tried to keep things neat. The only thing in disarray was the bed he had just stumbled out of. It certainly was hectic. That reminds me, I need to get ready to head back. Dr. Chiseiji is probably wondering where I am. No need to worry about that, Cementos said as he handed Izuku a message. Curious, the boy opened it and scanned the contents quickly. Dear Midoriya, due to the incident that occurred last night, I thought it would be better for you to return to UA and finish your internship under Recovery Girl. Your involvement in the incident last night and your undeniable talent for healing have begun to warrant some unnecessary attention. There was a Hero Commission agent asking after you. I am aware that you are trying to stay off of their radar. If the chance arises for you to return here and work with us once again, we will gladly accept you. Thank you for your work here at Hosu General Hospital. Sincerely, Dr. Chiseiji. We won't be able to keep the commission in the dark for very much longer, Nedzu said once Izuku had finished reading the letter. However, if we can get you licensed early, we can circumvent them trying to take you into their training program. I have spoken with your mother already, and she signed all of the forms. We will be able to catch you up at the summer training camp the school will be hosting after finals. Thank you, sir, Izuku said, bowing. No need to be so formal, Cementos said. We are only doing our duty as your guardians. Right? Izuku said as he stood up. Yes. Nezu asked. Have you heard any news about my dad? Izuku asked, keeping his eyes trained on the floor. Mom won't say anything, and I know you have probably been keeping eyes on him. I thought there would be more news about his release, but it was never mentioned. Hisashi Midoriya, otherwise known as Azar, was last seen in Kamino District. He has been regularly reporting to his probation officer and has not moved outside of that area. Last I heard, he was working as muscle on a construction site. He has made no moves and had made no indication of seeking out you or your mother, Netsu said as he watched the boy for any reaction to the news. Izuku looked up at him as if he was surprised at the information being given so freely. That's good, Izuku said as he let out a sigh of relief. Thank you. Feel free to ask at any time, Netsu said. We want to make sure you are safe after all. Recovery girl said she would expect you at noon, so you have some time to get tidied up. Keep up the good work. With that, Cementos and Netsu exited the room. When the pair had made it to the lobby, Cementos turned his head towards Netsu and asked, Are you sure you don't want to tell him the truth? Izuku has enough on his shoulders, Netsu said. Knowing his father went missing the week after he was released will not do him any good. We'll just have to stay extra vigilant when he leaves campus. We are lucky he is a workaholic. I guess so, Cementos said quietly. He had never doubted Netsu's words before, but something about this felt off. He would bring it up again later, perhaps in the next teacher meeting. Netsu was right about one thing. The kid really didn't need any extra stress after he had talked down a serial killer. On Monday after internships, Uraraka took the opportunity to seek out Midoriya before homeroom began. He was restocking the supplies in the infirmary when she found him. Midoriya! She practically squealed in excitement as she saw the boy's bushy green hair. At the mention of his name, Midoriya popped up and spotted Uraraka. A large innocent smile graced his face as he stood and returned her greeting. Uraraka had to fight really hard to keep her heart from bursting. She was sure she was blushing, but she soldiered on. What good was having a crush on someone if you couldn't even talk to them when they blessed you with a smile? How did your internship go? It was certainly exciting, Midoriya said with an awkward chuckle as if he was thinking of something painful. How was yours? You ended up going with Gunhead, right? Yeah, she responded enthusiastically. He was cutesier than I expected, but he taught me a lot about martial arts. That's awesome, Midoriya replied enthusiastically. You should show me next time we spar. Only if I manage to beat you, Uraraka said with determination. The green-haired boy was unexpectedly strong for his small frame. He was able to beat a majority of the hero students in quirkless combat training. Uraraka had been flipped more than once before she even knew the match had started. It only made her crush on the healer worse. Luckily, they sparred enough that she was able to get used to it. The warning bell rang, causing Uraraka to jump. Shoot, Uraraka said. I have to run. I'll see you in hero training, Izuku. Izuku waved as the energetic girl left before he realized that she had called him by his first name. He felt a blush color his face as he became embarrassed. It was the first time any girl other than his mother had called him by his first name. It made him feel warm and fuzzy inside, but also like he wanted to jump off a cliff to avoid becoming a blushing mess whenever he saw her next. Shizenji-sensei found him 5 minutes later mumbling to himself with a forgotten roll of bandages in his hand. Yaoyorozu couldn't believe her luck when she managed to invite her entire class to her home for a tea and study session. Even the elusive Midoriya had agreed. The classmate hardly ever left the campus. She had even overheard Ida mention that he lived there due to some family issues. She was lucky that Hagakure had insisted on inviting him even though the conversation had taken place in homeroom when he wasn't present. Now they were all here, minus Bakugo and Kirishima, who had decided to study on their own. She giggled as the class gaped at her home. She forgot that she was considered wealthy. It was just normal to her. She had already grouped the students together based on what subjects they most needed help with and was going around from group to group. Midoriya was surprisingly doing the same. The class had been shocked to learn that the boy already had his high school degree and was only at UA so he could get a medical and Quirk license to be a rescue and support hero. He had ended up being a wealth of knowledge during their study session. After an hour of studying, the students decided to take a break. Tsuyu walked over to Izuku and asked what everyone had wondered since the beginning of the semester. "I'm a pretty blunt person, Karo," she started before just asking point blank. "Why does Bakugo hate you so much, Karo?" Izuku's eyes widened and he looked down at his hands. "It's complicated," he started. At this point the other conversations petered out as they looked at the freckled teen who blushed at the attention. "We actually grew up together." A soft smile crossed his face as if he looked back on a fond memory. "I look up to him a lot despite his attitude. He has a fierce desire to protect and win." His smile fell to a contemplative look as he continued. "My quirk manifested in a stressful situation that led to my dad being arrested. Kaken had always looked up to him, so that didn't help our relationship." Todoroki looked at Izuku with wide eyes at the revelation, likely having put two and two together. Izuku flashed him a placating smile, but he continued. "My mom and I had to go away for a little bit during that time, and when I got back I wasn't allowed to use my quirk without a quirk specialist present. Kaken and the other kids started calling me quirkless because I couldn't show them my ability. It just escalated from there, really." Mina and Kaminari looked at each other uncomfortably. They had been trying to befriend the boy since day one. They hadn't really minded the verbal abuse from the blonde boy, but they could imagine a school full of kids that acted like him, and it did not paint a pretty picture for the childhood friend. Tsuyu broke the silence. "That's rough. I'm sorry if the question made you feel uncomfortable." "It's no problem," Izuku assured her. "Those are really just guesses. The only one I'm sure of is the first one. Really, don't be too hard on Kaken though. UA has been great about not tolerating any discrimination, but our previous schools really weren't. They basically encouraged the behaviors. He just needs some good friends that will allow him to change." Kaminari and Mina almost bowled Izuku over with a hug as they cried out, "You are such an angel. Really, you're too pure for this world." Izuku just blushed and stuttered. With their interaction, the tense silence was broken, and the classmates went back to studying at the prompting of Yaoyorozu. They studied for another hour before deciding to call it quits and head home. Bakugo was rather surprised when Kirishima invited him to study. He had been nothing but rude to the redhead, but he had to admit, the guy was starting to grow on him. He was able to keep up with him and take his explosions, so he could admit a grudging respect for his classmate. Against his better judgment, he agreed and found himself in the other teen's apartment dodging a pair of twins as they headed up to the teen's room. "I hope you don't mind my siblings," Kirishima said as they reached the room. "They can get a little loud." "Tisich, it's fine," Bakugo said, flopping into one of the beanbag chairs in the center of the room. "You haven't heard loud until you've met my mother." Kirishima laughed at his comment as they pulled out their study materials. Kirishima asked several questions as they studied, but otherwise it was quiet. Bakugo could hear the laughter of the twins through the door. It was odd. He hadn't known Holmes could be this happy. He was always being harassed by the old hag about something or other. If he wanted to laugh, he would go to the park with some of the extras. It startled him when they heard a soft knock on the door. A woman with jet black hair and red eyes opened the door with a tray of snacks balanced on one hand. "Here are some snacks for you boys," the woman said, setting the tray on the table. "How is it going?" Kirishima and his mother spoke back and forth softly before she left the room. "Is she always that quiet?" Bakugo asked Kirishima. "Oh yeah. She doesn't like raising her voice. Come to think of it, Dad is extra quiet too when it comes to talking to others. He's a big guy, so he likes to speak soft so he doesn't intimidate them as much. I think I'm probably the loudest, but I can't help it. I just get excited, you know." Bakugo grunted in response before turning back to his work, but Kirishima decided to take the opportunity to get to know his friend better. "What about your family?" he asked. "You said your mom is loud, but what about your dad? I bet he's super manly." Bakugo rolled his eyes. Nah, the old man is so quiet I forget he's there most days. I honestly don't know how the two of them ended up married. I bet the old hag bullied him into it. Bro, Kirishima said cautiously, I don't think it is okay to call your mom an old hag. She swears at me on the daily, so I think we are even, Bakugo said without even looking up from his work. Every family is different, I guess, Kirishima said with a shrug. Oh, is that why you're so mean to Midoriya? You never use his real name either, always calling him Deku and whatnot. Uraraka almost thought that was his real name. Bakugo leveled the red head with a glare. Deku is nothing more than a villain in the making. He's dangerous. You've said that before, Kirishima said still in his relaxed posture. He had built up an immunity for Bakugo's glares after the USJ. He figured it was just Katsuki's way of being. What do you mean, and why do you insist he's going to become a villain? The kid is literally the nicest person I've ever met, and we have All Might for a teacher. Bakugo weighed the pros and cons in his mind before closing his notebook and looking Kirishima in the eye to let the teen know he was serious. Have you ever heard of Azar? That's the hero that turned out to be a villain, right, when we were really young, right? Kirishima asked. Bakugo gripped his pencil hard before answering. He's Deku's dad. No way, Kirishima said, sitting up straight and looking at Bakugo. Yeah, Bakugo said. Deku and I grew up together. His dad was nicer to me than my own parents were, but then suddenly he's outed as a child abuser right when his kid manifests a quirk that can swap one thing for another. I think Deku did something with his quirk to switch the man's personality. It just doesn't make sense any other way. But weren't there other issues aside from the child abuse? Kirishima asked, not wanting to believe the healer capable of hurting someone like that. He was also embezzling funds from his company and bribing officials to keep quiet, right? There's no way that all happened in the small time Izuku's quirk manifested. It had been going on for years before then. Bakugo's shoulders tensed. He should have known no one would listen to him. He was still on probation, for heaven's sake. Frustrated, but not wanting to take it out on Kirishima, Bakugo started packing up his stuff to find a sandbag he could punch his frustration out on. Don't say I didn't warn you, Bakugo said gruffly as he made his way out despite Kirishima's pleading to get him to stay. Kirishima watched as Bakugo stormed out his front door, mildly impressed that he didn't explode anything on his way out. He didn't believe what the blonde said about Midoriya using his quirk on his father, but it was clear Bakugo believed it. Ugh, he had no idea what to do. Maybe he could talk to Mina. She usually knew what to do to help out friends in crises. Perking up at the idea, Kirishima grabbed his cell phone from his pocket and made the call. Mina had been laying on her bed thinking about Midoriya's past when she received the call. It wasn't uncommon for her friend to call her, but after the conversation with Izuku, she had a bad feeling she knew what the conversation was going to be about. Yo Kiri, what's up? She asked cheerfully. Well, I kind of need your help. Are you in trouble? She asked, sitting up straighter. No, Kirishima said. I studied with Bakugo today for the finals and finally got him to open up about why he hates Midoriya, but I handled it the wrong way and he stormed off. What did he say? Mina asked. Some of it is kind of personal, Kirishima said hesitantly. If I tell you it needs to stay between us, all right? Of course, Mina said, bringing her nails to her mouth. It must be bad if Kirishima was this worked up. So apparently Midoriya's dad is Azar. You know, that hero turned villain back from when we were kids. Bakugo grew up with Midoriya and knew the guy. Said he was super nice to him and it didn't make any sense that the man was a villain. He thinks Izuku used his quirk to switch him from good to evil when he was little. I told him that doesn't make sense and that the crimes aside from child abuse had been going on for longer than Izuku would have had his quirk. He got this frustrated look on his face, said, "Don't say I didn't warn you," and stormed off. Nothing I said could stop him. Crap, Mina said. Haha, yeah, Kirishima said in a defeated voice. He really believes it and is probably worried Izuku could turn anyone against him. Well, Mina said. At least, now it makes sense that they had to chain him to the podium to keep him from attacking the kid with the brainwashing quirk that won the festival. I hadn't even thought of that, Kirishima admitted. Actually, during our study session today, Tsu asked him why Bakugo hated him, Mina admitted. Midoriya admitted they grew up together and that it was probably because when his quirk manifested it landed his dad in jail, and then when all the police drama was over, Izuku wasn't allowed to use his quirk and ended up being treated as if he was quirkless by Bakugo and others in his previous schools. He still seems to really admire Bakugo and his desire to protect his friends though. He practically begged us to stay friends with him and allow him to change. This is so messed up, Kirishima said. Midoriya has no hard feelings, but he doesn't even actually know why Bakugo hates him, and Bakugo is scared of Midoriya turning people on him. I never really thought Bakugo would be afraid of anything Mina, but this scares him for sure. What do we do? I'm not sure, Mina said. Usually I would say we need to sit them down and talk it out, but apparently the teachers are keeping them separate because of whatever happened at their middle school. We might have to talk to Sensei about it. He might know enough about the case to get Bakugo to see sense. I don't know, Kirishima said. It might make Bakugo think I was ratting him out or something. Mina sighed. Maybe you can work on getting Bakugo to talk to him then. It would show him you were serious about listening to him, and it could help Aizawa resolve this mess. The Azar case happened almost 11 years ago. This has dragged on way too long. I'll try that, Kirishima said. Thanks for the help. I don't know what I would have done without you. It's no problem, but let me know what happens, okay? Mina said. When this gets resolved, I want to be able to give Midoriya the rundown so he's not left in the dark. All right, thanks again, Kirishima said before he hung up. Mina let the phone drop to her mattress and groaned. Why are boys so complicated? Uraraka and Aoyama had been paired up for the final against 13 Sensei. Uraraka had been excited to work with one of her favorite rescue heroes, but terrified of the teacher's quirk. She wasn't sure if the space-themed hero's quirk would work on Aoyama's laser, because it was essentially a beam of light, but she guessed they would find out soon enough. She had never really worked with Aoyama before. Honestly, she found the boy slightly off-putting. He tended to ignore all social norms and always stared off into space when he was talking as if he could see someone who wasn't there. He was nice enough though, and she felt kinship for his stomach problems, as she had a similar drawback from her quirk. It did surprise her though when the boy bluntly asked about her crush on Midoriya. She had been so surprised that she had let go of the railing she was holding onto and almost got Issy into 13's black hole. Luckily, the hero was just as surprised as the girl was and instantly capped her fingers. Uraraka used the momentum to execute a move Gunhead had taught her and cuffed the hero, but it was a close thing. She hadn't realized she had been that obvious about her crush. If Aoyama knew, the entire class probably did too. Oh, that was so embarrassing. Uraraka, snap out of it. You can think about it later. She smacked her cheeks to bring back her focus as she watched the monitors of her other classmates. Yaoyorozu had groaned when she saw she was paired up with Mineta against Aizawa. The small teen had gotten better about his comments and leering once he caught on that it made people in general uncomfortable, but he still creeped her out. It made her nervous knowing he wouldn't be able to come up with a decent plan. It was on her shoulders, but she was unsure of herself. She was first in studies, but when it came to battle, she had found herself losing more and more lately. Hey babe, Mineta said with a smirk on his face. So what's the plan? Please call me Yamamo, Yamamo said as she stood tall. I would suggest we head to the exit as fast as possible. If you throw some ball along the way, we have a better chance of slowing him down and making it through the gate. Mineta responded to her business-like tone by standing a little bit straighter and saluting. Capturing is what I do, he shouted before returning to his normal antics. I caught Shigaraki at the USJ for a little bit. Aizawa should be a piece of cake. The bell rang, saving Yaoyorozu from responding, and the pair took off. They made it halfway before Aizawa sent out his capture weapon, wrapping up Mineta as the boy protested. Yaoyorozu stared at Mineta for a moment before continuing to run towards the exit. Leaving a teammate behind? Aizawa asked as he pulled Mineta in and chopped his neck, rendering him unconscious. Yaoyorozu ducked into an alleyway and made some shurikens as Aizawa scaled the rooftops to search for her. Once he was looking the other way, Yaoyorozu snuck back to where he had left her partner and picked him up like a sack of potatoes before ducking into a new alleyway to avoid being spotted. Quickly she made some smelling salts and woke the boy. Yamamo? Mineta asked groggily, reaching towards her. The girl promptly dropped him when he tried to grope her, effectively waking him up the rest of the way. Ouch! Listen, Mineta, Yaoyorozu said. I don't know if we can win, but I know I won't be able to make it by myself, so you need to not get captured again, alright? Mineta's eyes began to water. The prettiest and smartest girl in class needs me? I can do this, he said, not realizing he was speaking aloud. Of course I can. Good, Yaoyorozu said, blushing slightly as she looked at the boy. Here's what I need you to do. 10 minutes later, Aizawa found Yaoyorozu and Mineta 2 city blocks away from the entrance. Yaoyorozu had stuffed Mineta into the front of a massive cannon that she must have made piece by piece. Aizawa's eyes widened as he realized what they were about to do. Yaoyorozu smiled at his expression and lit the fuse, sending Mineta soaring over the telephone wires and through the gate. They passed. Yaoyorozu smiled again. Victory had never felt so good. Midoriya and Shiro gave each other a fist bump as they met up to start their test against Midnight. Midoriya was honestly surprised when Netsu had released the list. He had thought for sure that Mineta would be against Midnight, but once he learned the small teen was with Yaoyorozu, it all made sense. Do you have a gas mask? Midoriya asked Shiro as they waited for the bell. No, Shiro said with slumped shoulders. I never even thought to put one on my costume before this exam. No worries, Midoriya said, clapping him on the shoulder. You just need to stay above the gas then. This terrain doesn't give you a lot of advantage on that front, but if you keep enough momentum and stick to me, I could swing you over the mist as long as I'm a safe distance from Midnight. Shiro hugged Midoriya. I'm so glad you are on my team, man. The bell rang, alerting, telling the duo it was time. The pair shared a grin and plunged in head first. Midnight was waiting in the middle of the field right in front of the entrance. Shiro strayed left and used his tape to build up swing above the mist Midnight produced as soon as the boys were in range. Izuku stayed his course, praying that Shiro would be able to guess where he was in the thick purple smoke cloud. His worries were put to rest when a few moments later he felt Shiro's tape attach itself to his torso. Immediately, Midoriya pulled the tape taut and guided the piece of tape towards the entrance. Shiro shot his tape to the gate sign. They were almost there. Suddenly, Midnight's whip snaked out of the smoke and caught Shiro by the ankle, pulling him down into the purple cloud as he swore. The sweet scent filled his nose and he fell asleep. Izuku heard the snap of the whip and the thud of his teammate's body as he ran forward. He immediately knew what had happened. Cursing himself for forgetting Midnight's favorite weapon, Midoriya kept his eyes peeled as he continued running. A shift in the smoke had Izuku tucking into a roll as he ran forward. Midnight's whip just narrowly missed wrapping around his middle. Come to mommy, darling, Midnight cooed. Izuku ignored the voice, knowing it was meant to throw him off his direction. The smoke started to part, revealing the gate in front of him. Izuku sped up, knowing that if he could see, Midnight could likely see him too. A whooshing sound caused him to duck into another roll. The roll propelled him forward through the gate as Midnight's whip once again missed him. He stood on the other side of the gate and laughed. He had made it. Shiro and Izuku had passed. Todoroki watched Bakugo as carefully as he would dare, thinking about what Izuku had shared at the study group. What are you staring at half and half? Bakugo growled, pulling Todoroki out of his thoughts. The test, Todoroki lied. I think we should distract All Might and run to the gate. There's no way we are going to be able to beat him in hand-to-hand combat. No way, Bakugo said heatedly. I'm gonna beat that BS's face in and prove that I am number one. Todoroki shook his head. Not that I don't want to beat him, but I don't think we have enough training to be able to do so yet. Our best bet is to run. The bell rang, signaling the start of the test, and Bakugo took off, heading straight for their teacher, who stood openly in the middle of the field. Todoroki rolled his eyes and followed the stubborn blonde, praying they would pass the test. Kaminari and Mina commiserated with each other the following day when grades were posted. They had no chance against Netsu. They were practically inconsolable until Aizawa announced they would be allowed to come to the summer training camp with remedial lessons. A class mall trip was quickly planned to prepare for the event, and Aizawa nodded his approval when Izuku shot him a look during the planning phase. Izuku beamed and made plans to meet up with them at the mall. The next day, Izuku bounced on his feet as he waited for his friends and classmates. He couldn't believe he had friends, but Uraraka and Ida definitely fit in that category. Todoroki probably did too. The stain incident had definitely brought them closer. He could probably consider most of his classmates friendly, although friends might be stretching it a little bit. Izuku didn't even know he could have that many friends. It was like a dream come true. Hagakure and Aoyama were the first to arrive. They spotted Midnight first due to her height, and then the bouncing green teen next to her. Midnight, Hagakure greeted, "Your tip worked great against Snipe-sensei in the test." Midnight lit up. "Glad to hear it. This kid here outran me." "It was magnific," Aoyama said. "We were able to watch his match on the monitors before ours started." "I didn't even know you could run that fast," Hagakure said enthusiastically. Izuku blushed at the praise. "Thanks." The trio of students visited for a while until Midnight caught sight of someone and waved them over. "Shinso, over here." A tall purple-haired teen with tired eyes started in their direction. "Hello, Midnight-sensei," the boy said in a deep voice. Izuku's eyes widened and filled with stars as he realized who the kid was. "Oh hey, you are the kid that won the festival with a mental quirk, right? Congratulations. I didn't get to see your last fight in person, but I loved watching your matches. I never had to patch anyone up after your matches," Izuku said as he unconsciously leaned closer to get a better look at the teen. "Okay," Shinso said as he sent a pleading look to Midnight, who was trying to hide a smile behind her hand. "It seems you already know Shinso," Midnight said, putting her hand on Izuku's shoulder and pulling him back. The boy blushed, realizing what he was doing, while Hagakure and Aoyama giggled. Since he won the sports festival, he will be transferring to the hero class next semester. That means he will be coming to the summer training camp with you guys. So we asked him to come and meet the class. Shinso, this is Hagakure, Aoyama, and Midoriya." The teens nodded as they were introduced. Midoriya is actually training to be a medical rescue hero under Recovery Girl. That's why you didn't see him participate in the sports festival. Midnight smiled, then turned to Izuku. "The rest of the class should be here soon. I'm going to go look around while you finish. Meet me at the entrance when you're done and I can give you a ride home." "Is she your mom or something?" Shinso asked as they watched her walk away. Izuku blushed. "Oh no, it's nothing like that. My mom is in America and my father is not around anymore, so I live on campus." "Oh look, it's Uraraka and Ida," Aoyama said, waving the pair over. The rest of the class soon showed up minus Bakugo and Todoroki. Kirishima sheepishly said the blonde had refused to come if Midoriya was there. Midoriya had just chuckled and shrugged. Mina and Kirishima shared glances while Ida suggested they split up in groups to get the things they needed and then meet up at the food courts. Uraraka was left alone with Midoriya. "What are you planning to get, Midoriya?" Midoriya's shoulders relaxed a little bit as Uraraka called him by his last name. Good. Little disappointed, but he didn't feel nearly as embarrassed as he had when Recovery Girl had found him blushing that week. "I was planning to get some more weights. What about you?" he asked with a smile. Uraraka took a look at that smile and immediately recalled Aoyama's words from their test. Blushing, she hurriedly said, "I have to get some bug spray. I guess we are going in different directions then. I will go. Bye." Then she ran away. Izuku was left blinking as the dust cloud settled. Uraraka had never run away from him before, and she was blushing. What was going on? He hoped she was okay. He knew she was physically fine. He hadn't picked up any injuries. Turning around, he headed towards the sports store. He was halfway there when he felt someone drape their arm across his shoulders and whisper in his ear. "Long time no see, Zuku." A deep voice that haunted his worst nightmares cooed in his ear. "What do you want?" Izuku whispered, feeling like he had just been plunged in an ice-cold lake. His father was supposed to be in Kamino. "Not here." "Is that all you have to say?" Hisashi said, smirking as he led his son to a set of benches even as he ignored the people around him. "I've been gone for over 10 years now, but you knew that, didn't you?" "You aren't supposed to be here," Izuku said. "Yet I am," Hisashi laughed. You've grown up so well. You look so much like your mother. You definitely got my freckles though. I don't know how you managed to look so innocent after what you did to me. Izuku gasped as his father gripped his shoulder uncomfortably tight. I should burn you to ash, he whispered with malice, but my new boss has a message for you. Izuku shot a glance at the man's face and saw a pleasant expression despite his scathing words. The dissonance only frightened him more. Watch your back at camp. Tamura's looking for a healer. Izuku. Uraraka's voice sounded unsure. Izuku's eyes snapped to her voice and he prayed she would understand the situation. Oh. Hisashi's voice interrupted Izuku's desperate thoughts. You got a girlfriend while I was away? Don't worry, honey. We were just having a friendly conversation. Uraraka raised her fists and said, I don't think you were. Leave him alone. Hisashi chuckled and raised his hands as he skirted around the girl to leave. No worries. I was just leaving, he said before addressing Izuku, who had now collapsed to the ground. See you around, kid. Then he vanished into the crowd. Are you okay, Izuku? Uraraka asked, subconsciously using his first name. Izuku grabbed his chest and tried to take deep breaths as he processed what his father had told him. Uraraka helped him back up onto the bench and rubbed circles on his back until he calmed down. Izuku pulled out his phone and texted Midnight his location before giving Uraraka a shaky smile. I'm okay, Izuku said. I just wasn't expecting a reunion with my dad today. That was your dad? Uraraka asked. I thought he was in prison. He got out on parole at the beginning of the school year, Izuku admitted. My mom and I still have a restraining order out, so he shouldn't have approached me. Thanks for helping out Ochako. Ochako gasped when he used her given name, catching Izuku's attention. Oh sorry, if you don't want me to use your first name. You just used mine several times back there, so I thought you wanted me to call you by your first name. I can stop if you don't like it. Izuku said as he blushed and looked down at his hands. No, Ochako said with a blush of her own. I don't mind at all, as long as you don't mind me calling you Izuku. I don't mind, Izuku said with a smile. Young love. Midnight said teasingly, as she looked Izuku over with a critical eye. Izuku and Ochako suddenly noticed how close they were to each other and immediately scooted away from each other with bright red faces. I got your text, Midoriya, she said, still throwing coy glances at the pair of students. What happened? Izuku explained, and Midnight immediately became serious. She whipped out her phone, and within the hour, Uraraka and Midoriya were giving statements to a police officer before being escorted home by Midnight. Shinso wasn't sure what Class 1A was going to be like, but he had not been prepared for their enthusiasm towards having him as a classmate. The acid girl had practically draped herself all over him as they shopped. He was worried that the redhead with the hardening quirk was going to kill him for messing with his girlfriend. He kept glancing their way with small frowns. Eventually the red-headed boy came over and the girl called out to him, Kiri, what's up? Kirishima awkwardly rubbed the back of his neck and said, I need to talk to you about the thing. Mina looked at him with a blank expression before realization lit her eyes. Oh, the thing, all right. She, finally, let go of Shinso and grabbed Kirishima by the hand, drawing him away from the group. Once Kirishima and Mina were far enough away from the group, she turned and asked him, So, any progress? Sort of, Kiri said with a shrug. I finally got him to talk to me again, but when I brought up talking to Aizawa, he shut down. Said something about him already being flipped, so then I asked him if there was a hero he would trust to not be flipped, and he mentioned Vlad King or Sir Night Eye. Class 1 BS teacher that seems to hate our guts as much as his students? Mina asked exasperatedly. I don't think he hates us, Kirishima responded. I just think he's super competitive, but yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure Class 1B will be coming to the training camp with us, so we can talk to him about it then, Mina said. It will work out the way it is supposed to. Now let's get back to the group. I want to see how long Shinso can tolerate me. You really shouldn't tease him like that, Kirishima said. The poor guy doesn't look like he has had a lot of support until now. That just means we'll have to add him to the Make Them Feel Loved group, Mina said. Hagakure had made a group chat with all the girls to clue them in on who they needed to help. What? Kirishima asked. Is Bakubro part of that group? Don't worry about it, Mina said as she dragged him back to the group. He was, but he already had a good support group. The bus ride to camp was largely uneventful. At least it was, until Aizawa stopped the bus and literally shoved the entire class off the edge of a cliff. Izuku managed to catch a branch on the way down, slowing his descent. It didn't stop him from grumbling about Aizawa's logical ruses though as he scanned his classmates for injuries. Seeing none, he joined Ida and Todoroki in clearing a path to camp. Because the earth beasts weren't organic, Izuku's quirk didn't work on them, but luckily for himself and Shinso, they had been through Aizawa's combat camp, giving them a leg up on hand-to-hand combat. The two boys quickly gravitated towards each other and helped push the group forward. Bakugo and Kirishima had split from the group as soon as Shinso and Midoriya had teamed up, Bakugo refusing to have anything to do with the pair. It took several hours, but the group managed to push through the foliage and quirk-made beasts to the campground. Shinso immediately spotted the small child just as Midoriya made his way over to introduce himself. He had to control a snort when the kid immediately punched the green-haired teen in the ball. He wondered why the kid was there in the first place, but that thought was quickly redirected as food was placed in front of him. He had no idea he could be so hungry. As camp continued, Shinso learned more and more about his classmates and the others in the hero program. For some reason, 1B had some kind of one-sided rivalry with Class 1, particularly the blonde. He was annoying for all sorts of reasons, the biggest probably being that he looked nice enough until he opened his mouth. He also noticed that Bakugo seemed to have some kind of issue with the healer. They were never in the same group and were never allowed to spar. The rest of the class seemed to have just accepted it as the way things were, so Shinso figured it was better to stay out of it. He already knew the blonde hated his guts for brainwashing him out of his victory at the sports festival. It's not like he wanted to be hated, but he wasn't really here to make friends. He was here to learn how to be a hero. Vlad King rubbed his forehead as he felt a migraine coming on. Of all the things he had to do this week, he had not expected to be asked to talk to Class 1 as resident time bomb about Azar's kid. He had told the redhead and pink-skinned girl to ask Aizawa, but when they explained that their friend was convinced the kid had somehow already had Aizawa on his side and didn't trust the teacher to actually listen to his concerns. He warned them that he would have to inform Aizawa of the meeting, and they said that was fine. So here he was, sitting with 3 students from a class that wasn't his own and listening to a frankly frightening story that had twisted a childhood friend into a bully. The worst part of it was that the story was completely believable. In fact, the Hero Commission had investigated and double-checked to make sure the child could not have done what this boy feared. Before we start, I have a question for you. Why did you choose me to clear this up? Vlad asked seriously. Uncle Midoriya said you were friends before he was sent to jail. He said a lot of good things about you, so I figured you would be partial to my story, Bakugo said with a fierce glare. Well, you were right. Hisashi and I were good friends. We did a lot of missions together. I had a lot of respect for his skills, Vlad King said. That's why I was shocked by the accusations and news of his arrest. I thought someone was trying to frame him. When I heard about his son's quirk, I also thought what you did. So I did some digging of my own. Vlad paused and rubbed his neck awkwardly. I don't know how to say this, but I was wrong. Bakugo's hands clenched into tight fists. I went over the evidence and their case files. They had been keeping track of his bribes and misdeeds for longer than Izuku had been alive. I even looked at the doctor's notes on the kid's quirk to see if there was anything at all that could have caused a switch from the good man I knew to a child abuser behind closed doors. Vlad looked Bakugo straight in the eye and said the next part as clearly and concisely as he could. He wasn't even supposed to have a quirk. His quirk is trauma-induced from the physical and emotional abuse he and his mother endured. Mina and Kirishima gasped as Bakugo looked down at the floor. The night that Hisashi was arrested, he was drunk. He was beating Inko so badly that she probably would have died if Izuku hadn't tried to stop him. Even then, stepping in would have resulted in him being beaten, but he did it anyways. The moment he touched his father's bare skin, he traded all of his father's anger for his own happiness. It took the boy 2 months to control his quirk enough so he could return his father's emotions and gain back his own. He has been in training ever since to make sure that he can control it, so nothing else like it could happen again. No, Bakugo whispered. That can't be true. Kirishima put a hand on Bakugo's shoulder in an attempt to comfort him, but Bakugo roughly shoved it off and stood up, fists popping. Vlad stood his ground. Ignoring the déjà vu he felt as he watched Bakugo in the same position he had once been in. It is true, Vlad said in a calm voice. Everything was verified by a respected detective with a lie-detecting quirk. Without a word, Bakugo stomped out of the room and out into the forest. Worriedly, Mina and Kirishima tried to follow him only to be held back by Vlad. He needs a little bit of alone time, Vlad said. I'll keep an eye on him. You two head to bed. Keep what you learned to yourself. He waited until the pair responded with nods and then disappeared into the foliage after Bakugo. As Mina and Kirishima walked back to their rooms, they heard a large explosion followed by a mournful wail. Neither team could hold back their tears. Mina hugged Kirishima as her body racked with sobs. Kirishima just hugged her back with silent tears rolling down his own face. They stayed like that until Aizawa found them and escorted them to their rooms. Bakugo will be along in a while. Katsuki knew anger, he knew rage, but he had never known guilt. He couldn't hear any more, he had to get out. He stomped off somewhere he could be alone to process. His feet took him to the clearing he used for training and he let loose the feeling he had been feeling. A large explosion ripped free from his hands, larger than any he had made previously, as he yelled his frustrations out at the sky. How could he not know? What had he done? An image of Izuku young and laughing as they played flashed through his mind. He used to smile like the sun. When had he learned to despise it instead of cause it? All those times he stepped in front of Katsuki's fists, all those times he just took the beating without complaining, all those times he asked him why. Katsuki had thought he was justified. Katsuki had thought he was the hero, but really, he was the villain. But if that was true, why did all of his middle school teachers tell him he was a hero? Why did the kids follow him around like he was amazing? How did he get into freaking UA high school? He didn't know anymore. Katsuki dropped to his knees, his hands trembling from overusing his quirk and high emotions. Vlad waited for the explosions to stop before coming out to find the boy kneeling with trembling hands. He took note of the tears running down his face as he struggled to breathe and rushed to make sure the boy wasn't having a panic attack. Bakugo looked at him blankly, but his breathing evened. You know, when I got the charges for suicide baiting, my mom laughed. Vlad took a deep breath and helped the boy to his feet as he asked. Why? Because she tells me those things all the time, Bakugo said with a small laugh. Vlad struggled to keep his face calm at the admission, but Bakugo wasn't looking at him anymore, he was looking at the cabin. I thought it was normal to tell people things like that. I never meant it until I said it to Izuku. I wonder what he thought when I said it. We grew up together. He could always see right through me. Sometimes I think he knew me better than I knew myself. I hated that. I hated how angry he made me, how much I thought he took from me. I hated how he could look at me with such kindness even after I beat him down. I hated how he made me feel. I wanted him gone. Now that you know the truth, how do you feel about him? Vlad asked. I don't know, Bakugo whispered, looking at his hands. Well, Vlad said. You have plenty of time to think about it. I can tell you one thing for sure though. What? Bakugo asked. If you didn't have potential to be a true hero, Aizawa would have expelled you by now. Bakugo scoffed at him as he wiped the tears off of his face. Just consider UA a chance to change for the better, Vlad said as he led the teen back to the cabins. Midoriya held his breath as Vlad King led Kaken away. He had just been visiting with Koda in the boy's secret hideout when he came upon the scene. Kaken was right. He knew the boy better than he knew himself sometimes. Even though he knew the boy was angry, he could never pinpoint the reason. He didn't know his mother's suicide baited him as if it was a joke, although he knew she swore like a sailor. He thought to Uncle Masaru the man had a kind, long-suffering smile, but there was a weariness to him. He wondered if he had just been resigned to the verbal abuse. Mitsuki had been that way for years after all. He was sure Kaken was not the only one who was on the receiving end of the verbal abuse. How had he not noticed? It wasn't normal for families to interact like that, but when had he ever known what a normal family was? He felt the tears build in his eyes as he sat at the base of the tree he was under and tried to process what he had heard. Izuku had known that Kaken had meant what he said. He had seen the anger building, but didn't know where the anger was coming from. Maybe it was because his father had been the boy's only reprieve from the verbal abuse. His father had always liked Kaken. He showered the boy with praise. Izuku had been a little jealous that he always talked to Kaken like that when he swore and hit him at home. Maybe it had been the same for Kaken. Except his abuse had never stopped. His abuse became normal and influenced his attitude. His anger and jealousy had never had anywhere else to go. Izuku was upset at himself for never noticing how badly the boy was hurting. If he had known, maybe he would have been able to stop it before it got this bad. He wasn't allowed anywhere near Kaken now because of the bullying in middle school, but that wouldn't last forever. When Kaken was able, he would be able to talk with him. He should know, after all, that he had always forgiven him. That he still looked up to him even if the boy had hated his guts. He knew the boy was trying to protect something. He was trying to win. He just hadn't known the names of his demons until now. Kaken needed time, and that was okay. Izuku could wait. Blue fire spread through the forest, consuming trees like candy. Midoriya and Shinso stood in front of a small, trembling child. Barely managing to conceal tremors of their own, they faced a wall of giant muscle accurately named Muscular. Shinso had never been more grateful for Aizawa's speed training. If the teens hadn't made it to Koda when they did, the boy would no longer be among the living. Midoriya had made it first, literally saving the boy from a large fist aimed directly at the child's head. "Ooh," Muscular laughed as he looked at Izuku holding Koda. "How lucky. One of the targets came to me. What, no love for me?" Shinso asked, panting from his run up the cliff. "Wh," Muscular responded before going blank-faced under the influence of Shinso's quirk. Midoriya checked the shaking boy over as Shinso made Muscular knock himself out. "Are you all right, Koda? Why did you come to save me even though I was so mean to you?" Koda asked, looking at the green-haired teen. "You don't have to be nice to me for me to want to save you," Midoriya said with a kind smile. "That's just what heroes do." Koda's eyes went wide as he cried with relief. Midoriya picked up the boy and nodded to Shinso. "Let's go," the purple-haired teen said. Izuku nodded and shifted Koda to a piggyback position before the pair took off to find Aizawa. They spotted their teacher running through the forest as he avoided the flames. "Sensei!" Shinso called. Aizawa stopped when he spotted the boys with Koda. "Midoriya, Shinso, Koda, why were you coming from the mountain?" Koda's aunt didn't know where he was when the attack started, so Shinso and I went to find him. The villain Muscular was there about to attack him. Shinso took him out and we came here, Midoriya said as he handed Koda over to the teacher. Muscular mentioned that they had more than one target. "Midoriya is apparently one of them," Shinso said. Midoriya blinked like a deer in the headlights. In his desperation to share the news, he hadn't even thought about that. "Oh," Midoriya said, "you're right." Aizawa gave Koda back to Midoriya and started to bark orders. "Midoriya, I want you and Shinso to escort Koda back to the cabin. I will inform the other heroes that the villains are targeting students, and have them relay the message that they are allowed to use their quirks to evade capture and return to the cabin. Go now." The boys nodded and ran in the direction of the cabin with Koda as Aizawa ran to the clearing where the wild pussycats were fighting. As the boys neared the cabin, a burst of flame cut off their route. Koda let out a cry and squirted water from his hands, extinguishing the flames closest to them. Well, what do we have here?" a shadowed figure asked as he stepped into their path. His hands ignited with blue fire and his bright blue eyes shone like daggers. "I only want Midoriya, the child and the brainwasher can go." The young heroes took up defensive positions as Koda held tighter to Midoriya. "Why don't you just forget you ever saw us?" Shinso said with a smirk to mask his fear. The blue-eyed stranger immediately darted forward, throwing a flaming fist into Shinso's solar plexus. Shinso fell to his knees, gasping, trying to regain some air in his lungs. "Shinso!" Izuku yelled as he stepped forward to throw a punch, only to feel Koda being lifted off of his back. "Izuku!" Koda yelled as he dangled in a second villain's grasp. Izuku stepped back, trying to keep both villains in his peripherals as he took stock of the situation. The new villain was a girl about the same height as Izuku, with 2 buns on her head and a creepy gaze on her face. The girl said, "Midoriya, you are even cuter than your pictures." "Shut it, Toga," the man said as he moved to join her. "But Dabi," Toga whined. Dabi ignored her and faced Izuku. "So kid, what's your choice?" "Put Kota down and I'll come with you," Izuku said, lifting his hands in surrender. "No, Izuku," Shinso said from the ground as he tried to get to his feet, but the blonde threw a knife that left a small cut on the bridge of his nose. Toga sang, "No moving." "Come on kid, I don't have all day," Dabi said, motioning for Izuku to come closer. Izuku walked forward and Toga dropped Kota roughly on the dirt, causing the boy to cry out. "It'll be all right," Izuku said, training his eyes on Kota. "You and Shinso go to the cabin and let them know what happened, all right?" Dabi roughly grabbed Izuku by the shoulders and led him into the foliage as Toga tied his hands behind his back. "Izuku!" Kota yelled, reaching for the healer only to be held back by Shinso. "We aren't strong enough to take them on, and they know my quirk, so I won't be able to get them to respond to me," Shinso said, gritting his teeth as he stood up. "Our best bet is to get a teacher. The cabin is straight ahead." "But Izuku saved me," Kota said. "Now it's my tea." Kota fell silent as Shinso's quirk took effect. "Sorry kid," Shinso said as he picked Kota up and ran to the cabin. Aizawa cursed when he was given the news over his comms that Izuku had been taken by a fire user and a girl with an unidentified quirk. He knew he should have escorted the boys back, but he thought he had already taken care of the intruder with the flame quirk. Now he was here trying to save Ragdoll from the same fate as Izuku. He prayed the boy would be okay as he dodged another swipe from Spinner's blades. "Where are you taking me?" Izuku asked as Dabi pushed him forward. "Our boss wants to meet you," Toga said in her sing-song voice as she danced around the pair of males. "Tomu's been wanting a healer." "Quiet," Dabi hissed as he pulled them to a stop. Toga immediately quieted and looked around. Izuku did the same, hoping he would hear someone familiar. A faint rustling of leaves to their left caught the group's attention, and immediately after Shuji appeared from the brush missing an arm. "Run!" he yelled. Toga and Dabi leapt into action and dashed alongside the large student as Dark Shadow and Tokoyami broke through the treetops. Moments later, Bakugo and Todoroki broke through the tree line on the road ahead of them, followed closely by Moonfish. Their eyes went wide as they spotted Tokoyami and the other group of kids and villains fleeing him. "Moonfish, stop!" yelled Dabi, but the other villain was blinded by his lust for blood and ran straight through their group into Dark Shadow and Tokoyami. Dark Shadow quickly overwhelmed the blade-toothed villain and turned to the group, still blinded by fear and rage. Dabi and Bakugo both lit up the night in response. Dark Shadow retreated into an exhausted Tokoyami. There was a moment of quiet before Bakugo noticed Midoriya had his hands tied behind his back. "Oi!" The blonde boy snarled, his hands still sparking. "Where do you think you are taking Izuku?" Todoroki, Bakugo, Shuji and Tokoyami surrounded Dabi, Toga and Izuku in defensive stances. "Give the nerd back," he growled and leaped forward. He was intercepted by Toga with a feral smirk as she used her blades to knock his explosion off course. Dabi let loose another torrent of fire to ward off Shuji, who had tried to grab for Izuku. Izuku took advantage of the distraction to slip out of his ropes and grab the back of Dabi's neck, trading the man's stamina for his own exhaustion. Dabi's flames abated and he swayed on his feet, trying to stay awake. Shuji took advantage of the distraction to knock him out. Toga nimbly dodged Bakugo's blasts and used Todoroki's glacier to leap into the treetops, leaving Dabi behind. "How the heck did you get caught?" Bakugo said, turning to Izuku. Luckily, the boy had just traded his fear for Shuji's healing, so he didn't flinch from the boy's aggressive question, instead answering him with a deadpan expression. "They were using Kota and Shinso as hostages. I was the one they wanted, so I traded myself for them." "Why didn't Shinso use his quirk?" Tokoyami asked. Izuku had switched to checking him over. Aside from exhaustion, the boy was fine. "They were prepared for it and wouldn't talk to him, so he couldn't use it," came the reply. Izuku stood and looked at the group. "We should head back to the cabin." I know they are after me, but it sounded like they were after some others too. Stupid nerd, Bakugo growled softly, don't tell me what to do. Agreed, Shuji and Todoroki. What should we do with the villain? Tokoyami said. He should be out for at least an hour, Izuku said. We should leave him for the teachers to deal with. All right, Todoroki said. Let's head out. The group formed up and started heading in the direction of the cabin. Todoroki and Shuji were in front, Izuku was in the middle, and Bakugo and Tokoyami in the rear. We don't know how many of them are out there, so we need to keep our eyes peeled. Todoroki said, turning when he didn't hear a response from Midoriya or Bakugo. The pair had vanished, leaving a lanky man in a top hat and mask nimbly dodging Dark Shadow's attacks as he leaped into the nearby tree tops. Get back here! Dark Shadow growled. Todoroki immediately slammed his foot to the ground in an attempt to catch the tree and its occupant in the ice. The man in the mask simply giggled and waved as he ran away with a green and red marbles clutched in his hands. The students remaining began to chase the man. When they finally caught up with the villain, they found him disappearing into an inky black portal behind Toga, who gave them a cheeky wave. Aizawa heard them before he saw them. There were a chorus of desperate pleas to stop that he recognized as Todoroki, Tokoyami, and Shuji. He burst into the clearing they were in with his quirk activated, only to witness the three boys desperately grasping at thin air. The trio looked utterly exhausted and heartbroken. Aizawa felt his heart plummet as he approached the group. Are you all right? He asked gruffly, gaining their attention. Sensei, we are all fine, Shuji said, looking at him resignedly. But they took Midoriya and Bakugo. For the second time that evening, Aizawa cursed. Katsuki groaned as he came to. Cracking his neck, he pulled his head up and surveyed the room he was in. Across the room, a tied-up Izuku eyed him cautiously with bleary eyes, before he realized he was also tied to a chair and cuffed with quirk suppressors. Katsuki cursed as he began to strain against his bonds. Oh, it looks like our guests of honor are awake. A lanky man in a full-face mask said with a bow towards Shigaraki. Rise and shine, Shigaraki said with a creepy smile. Sorry for the rough welcome, but we couldn't find any other way to invite you to our humble abode. Katsuki took stock of his surroundings to find they were in some kind of dingy bar surrounded by Kurogyri, Toga, Dabi, Spinner, Magna, the masked man, called Compress, and most noticeably Azar. Shigaraki patted Azar's shoulder. This one wanted to be reunited with his long-lost son, Shigaraki said as Azar leered, his red eyes bored into Izuku as Katsuki swore and rattled his chair in an attempt to throw himself at the man. Azar turned his gaze on Katsuki as a familiarly fond smile graced his face. Katsuki, it's been a while. I heard that you have been keeping my son in his place in my absence until recently. I knew you would. Katsuki grimaced and stared at the man as if he had never seen him before. Shut up, he growled in response. You wouldn't attack a training camp just for a reunion. You hated Izuku's guts. What are we really doing here? You always were a smart one, Hisashi said, dropping the kind charm with a smirk. It just so happens the League of Villains is recruiting. Congratulations, you made the cut. Like H at $, we did, Katsuki swore. We wouldn't join you if our lives depended on it. Now, there's no need for language, Shigaraki said with a fearsome grin. He dropped his hand from Azar's shoulder and made his way over to stand in front of Izuku. What about you? We could really use a healer. Izuku said nothing, his eyes still trained on his father, who watched with a wry smirk before nodding his head. Izuku dropped his eyes to Tamura's dangerous red ones. I won't join you. Tamura's frown quickly turned downward, but the boy continued in a trembling voice. I will gladly heal any who needs it while I am here. Don't heal the enemy, stupid Deku. Kakin yelled in exasperation. I took an oath as a medical rescue hero to heal any who are within my power to do so, Izuku said, not taking his eyes off of Tamura's dangerous gaze. I will honor that no matter what circumstances I find myself in. Tamura's grin grew impossibly wider as the smile traveled to his eyes, giving the man a disturbingly innocent expression that seemed at odds with his villainous demeanor. Kurogyri, Tamura said. Take our newest friend to see Sensei. The misty man nodded and strode forward, lifting his hands as he went. A portal appeared beneath Izuku's chair. The last thing the boy saw was Kaken's angry, worried eyes as he shouted his name. Uraraka clenched her fists in anger as she listened to the news. How dare they? They have no right to assume that just because a child was born to a villain that they would follow in his footsteps. They had no right to assume that Midoriya was anything other than a victim in this attack. With disgust, she shut off her news app and shoved the phone into her pocket as the train doors opened. She got off and wove through the crowds to the hospital where the classmates who had been hurt in the attack were recuperating. She had never felt so powerless before. Shinso had not expected his first-class trip with UA to be quite so traumatizing. Now he was here, visiting class members he had barely knew but felt more connected to than ever before. He sighed wearily as he thought back to that fateful moment when he had ran like a coward. He had thought that the teachers would be able to handle it. He had trusted they would be able to get him back, but they hadn't. He sighed again as he trudged up the hospital stairs to the room where he knew Yaoyorozu was. Next time he would do better, he thought as he opened the door to the room where his new classmates had assembled around Yaoyorozu. He tried to ignore the fact that Midoriya and Bakugo might not have a next time. Kirishima was a wreck, but a determined one. He had been the first to arrive and had heard what his classmates said to the officers interviewing her. This was his chance to save his friends. He knew he had to do it, so he proposed his crazy plan to the class and prayed someone would back him up. Izuku, a deep voice reverberated through the dark room he now found himself in. How nice to meet you. My protege said he had found a healer, but I never thought it would be you. Have you come to heal me? Izuku shivered at the overwhelming power the man exuded as he spoke. I have come to do what I can, Izuku responded, knowing he couldn't promise any miracles. He knew the moment he laid eyes on the man that he would never be able to heal him completely. Even without his quirk, Izuku could see the extensive scarring on the man's face. The man hummed his consent and waved a hand at Kurogiri, who uncuffed Izuku from the chair. Izuku's quirk flared to life and he gasped at the information that flooded in. The man's pain signature was greater than All Might's had been when they met. Oh, what an interesting quirk, the mysterious man said as Izuku stood and moved forward. You can sense it, sir? Izuku asked hesitantly as he moved forward to get a better look at the man's breathing apparatus. Please, young one, the man said, call me sensei, and yes, I can sense your quirk. Does your quirk have anything you know of that would interfere with my own in healing you, sir? Izuku asked, doing everything he could to keep his voice from cracking. No, young one, Sensei replied with a smirk. You may begin any time you wish. All right, Izuku stuttered as he peeled his gloves off and began to reach for the man's skin. I won't be able to heal everything in one session, but I can relieve the pain at the very least. Another hum was his only reply as he touched the man's skin and they both began to glow. You care for him more than I thought you would, Azar said when Izuku disappeared through the portal. Bakugo glared at the man who put his hands up in mock surrender. No need to kill me with your eyes, kid. I just thought that with you being on probation for suicide baiting and all, you wouldn't care what happened to the kid. Shut up. Bakugo barked at the man. He had so many confusing emotions. He was honestly worried for Izuku, especially with the revelations from yesterday. He redirected his anger towards the man in front of him. You lied to me for years. Don't think you can just waltz in and pretend to be best friends. You really were a villain all this time. Ah, look at that, the kid really does have a heart. Toga said as she swung her legs back and forth on the bar stool. Do you think I like being a villain? Azar said, his voice dangerously low as he stalked towards the boy in the chair with smoke billowing out of his nose. Society has left me no choice. Just look at what they are saying about you and Zuku. Soon, you won't have a choice but to side with us. Tamura smirked as he pressed the on button on the remote. The news station popped up to a news anchor with horns. Some citizens are asking, why save them? These kids are both bound to become villains anyway. We have found over the past few hours that Bakugo Katsuki and Midoriya Izuku both have shady pasts that may have led to the interest and subsequent kidnapping by the League of Villains. That's right, Bob. Another anchor chimed in. Bakugo Katsuki is on probation for suicide baiting a classmate in middle school, and Midoriya Izuku is the biological son of one of the most infamous villains of the decade, Azar. Additionally, Bob chimed in again, we have found a police report that confirms Midoriya Izuku had contact with his father a week before the kidnappings. If that doesn't scream guilty, I don't know what does. Either way, the female anchor with bright pink hair chimed in again. UA has prepared a press conference to address these issues, which will be aired live tonight at 6. Tamura muted the TV and looked at Bakugo, who was fuming. Who gives a hashtag at $% at hashtag $% what the news says? Bakugo shouted. The truth will come, oh you woe. Bakugo's rant was interrupted by Azar spitting a tongue of flame straight at the kid's head. Bakugo dodged, but some of his blonde spikes smoked from the sudden increase of heat. Watch your tongue, boy, Azar said with a cruel gaze. It was then that Bakugo knew without a doubt Vlad King's story was true. We'll let you think on it, Tamura said as Azar turned around and stalked out of the bar. But think quietly, okay? He said as Toga and Twice gleefully approached him with a muzzle. Kirishima, Todoroki, Yaoyorozu and Ida all stood with their backs to the wall next to the warehouse Yaoyorozu's tracker had led them to. The entire warehouse is full of those Nomu things, Kirishima hurriedly whispered to the others, but I don't see Bakugo or Midoriya anywhere. Just then a loud crash reverberated as Lady gigantified and crushed the building. It looks like the heroes have this under control, Ida said. We should. Ida's words were cut off as a terrifying presence made itself known. A powerful deep voice said, Heroes, it's not very nice to knock down people's homes now, is it? When Kurogiri returned with Izuku, the unconscious boy was cradled in his arms as if he was a precious bride. He carried him past the group into a back room. Bakugo strained against his bindings as the boy was carried past him, trying to see if he was all right. The teen looked pale and sickly, but otherwise all right. Kurogiri gave Tamura a nod when he reappeared. Where's Azar? Toga asked. Who cares? Dabi said as he picked his drink up. If he wants to miss the show, that's up to him. Be quiet. Tamura hissed as he turned the volume up. Principal Nedzu, Eraserhead and Vlad King appeared on the screen. We have failed to keep our students safe. It is our ultimate failing as an educational institution, as well as pro-heroes, and for that we apologize. The group of men stood and bowed to the crowd. After Principal Nedzu's statement, the reporters stood and started clamoring to have their questions asked. Bakugo has proven violent enough to be restrained on national television before, and Midoriya is indeed related to a villain. Do you think the villains will be able to turn your students to their side? A man with a foghorn for a mouth asked. Never in a million years, Aizawa said. It is true that Bakugo has a record of aggressive behavior, however, no one has a bigger motivation to be a hero than he does. As for Midoriya, putting aside the fact that he is indeed the same child that was abused by his villain father, he is already the embodiment of all a hero could hope to be. UA only accepts the best and brightest into the hero course, and I can confidently say that those boys meet that standard. The conference droned on, but they were interrupted by a knock on the door and a voice calling, Pizza Dum. Moments before the door was blown off its hinges by All Might himself. Within moments, Kamui Wood's branches restrained every villain in the room, and All Might had knocked Kurogiri unconscious. Bakugo tried desperately to speak through his muzzle as All Might came towards him. I am here, young Bakugo. Let me get that muzzle off of you, All Might said. The moment it came off, Bakugo tried to tell him about Midoriya, but any words he would have said became gurgled as black goop expelled itself from his mouth, blocking his words, and transporting him and rest of the league to the warehouse location. Moments later, Nomu began flooding in their place. All Might, a police officer yelled. They've been teleported to the other location where a huge villain appeared and took down our team with the use of multiple quirks. Endeavor! All Might exclaimed as he turned to the flame hero. I have this under control, Endeavor said as he threw a flame ball at one of the beasts. Go! Without another word, the blonde hero leaped into the sky towards Kamino. Bakugo found that the ropes they had used to tie him to the chair had come with him, but not the chair. Taking advantage of his captor's disorientation, he shimmied out of the ropes and slid his hands out of the cuffs they had him in before looking around for Izuku. If they had transported him, they most likely wouldn't have left Izuku behind at the bar. He spotted the unconscious teen next to Kurogiri, right behind the entire line of villains. "Sensei," Tamura called, looking past Bakugo. Bakugo turned to see a massive masked man hovering in the air above a downed best jeanist. "Young Tamura," the man said as some creepy black tendrils extended from his fingers towards Kurogiri. "Take your team and evacuate. It's your time to shine now, little successor." When the tendrils made it to Kurogiri, the mist-like man jolted as if he had been shocked with electricity, and a large portal appeared over his head. "Not without you," Tamura said, his arm outstretched towards the man. Whatever Sensei had responded was lost when, a moment later, All Might fell from the sky with his trademark grin. "Go," Sensei said before turning to face the titan before him. Bakugo had used Tamura's distraction to get to Izuku. He picked up his old friend and turned to face the group who was now hedging him in. "You're not going anywhere," Tamura sneered as he signaled to the others. A wall of flame shot towards Bakugo, who swiftly dodged it while he swung Izuku over his shoulder. He grunted under the weight, but did not stop moving. Trying to get out of All Might's strike zone, he took a step back as Toga darted forward. She managed to scratch him with the knife, but he was able to dodge at the last possible second, sending her through the portal and him away from it. Dabi was the next to attempt grabbing the pair of teens, but Bakugo dodged and spun with his leg up, kicking the flame villain through the portal as well. Tamura shouted in rage and ran forward, hand outstretched as he attempted to hit Bakugo, but the blonde teen stood his ground and brought up his hand. He let out an explosion that knocked the blue-haired man back several feet, giving him some leeway as he maneuvered further away from the portal. The portal began to contract, causing the leftover villains to shout and run for it. "Come on, Tamura," Spinner shouted, grabbing the blue-haired teen by the arm. "We can always get them later. We need to go now." Tamura growled but followed the lizard man through the waiting portal. Bakugo shifted Izuku back into a more comfortable hold and ran towards the wall that had somehow managed to remain standing in the chaos of the fight. "Bakugo!" Kirishima yelled as the blonde turned the corner. The blonde raised his eyebrows at the group, but handed Izuku over to Ida. "Get him to a hospital as fast as possible," Bakugo said. "I don't know what they did to him, but he's been like this for at least a day." Ida nodded and sped off. Bakugo turned to the rest of the group. "We need to get further out of range so All Might can fight with no restrictions." "Right," the group said as they followed Ida's trail of smoke. All Might breathed a sigh of relief when he saw Bakugo and Izuku escaping. "It seems it's just you and me now, All for One," he said as he blocked an attack from an air cannon quirk that would have leveled more buildings. "As it should be," All for One replied with a smirk. The titans clashed and shockwaves shook the surrounding buildings even as the rescue heroes on site evacuated the citizens and downed heroes. "You seem to be getting slower, All Might," All for One taunted as they exchanged blows. "Too slow to save your students? Now where have I seen that before?" "You villain," All Might said, and he lost his smile and began hitting the villain harder. All for One laughed and returned blows with equal vigor. "Your little healer does good work." All Might's thoughts flashed to the image of Bakugo carrying the green-haired teen off of the battlefield. "What did you do to him?" All Might growled. "You are losing your smile," All for One taunted as he went for another punch. All Might dodged and threw a punch in retaliation. "The boy just offered to heal me," the villain said casually as he blocked the punch and backed up. "He has a very interesting quirk, that one. Too many drawbacks for it to be truly useful to me, but interesting nonetheless. The boy wouldn't have been able to stop himself from healing me if he tried. It's a shame he's so predisposed to heroes. I think my successor was starting to take a shine to him." "Where did you send your little successor?" All Might asked. "It's a shame he won't be here to join you in jail." "Now is that any way to talk about your own teacher's grandson?" All for One replied, taking sick pleasure in making All Might drop his smile. "What did you say?" All Might said, dropping his fist and allowing All for One to shoot an air cannon straight at him. "Keep your head on straight, Toshi," Gran Torino said as he jumped into the fray, and pulled the blonde hero out of the way. He's trying to get in your head. Win the fight and you can play games when he's in jail. Gran, All Might said before straightening up with renewed determination. You're right. I'm going to take you down. Are you sure you can? All for One taunted with a self-confident grin. I haven't felt this good in years. Instead of answering, All Might leaped and punched his signature Carolina smash. A dust cloud surrounds the fight as the pair of men trade blows. Neither men are calling out their moves, they are just simply fighting, as if they were two children whose play got too rough. Eventually, the tousle ends and the dust settles, revealing All for One bleeding and unconscious on the ground, and All Might restraining him with a fist of triumph in the air. Dabi and Toga looked around their surroundings as they waited for the rest of the group to come through the portal. Toga sauntered up to Dabi and gave him a hug. That was him, wasn't it? She asked in an uncharacteristically soft voice. The kid who healed you? Dabi clenched his fists, then released them with a sigh. Yeah, it was, Dabi whispered, looking at his hands. If I had known, I never would have brought him to the group. As it was, this was the least I could do for him. He was a real cutie, Toga said, stepping back and holding her hands up to her cheeks as the rest of the group started coming through the portal. Dabi caught her hint and fell back into his bored expression as he turned to deal with Tamura's destructive mood, internally praying that the kid would be all right. Bakugo stood at the edge of Izuku's hospital bed, looking down at the peaceful but scarily gaunt face of his old friend. It had been 3 days. 3 days since All Might had put his old rival in Tartarus. 3 days since Bakugo had escaped those crazy villains with Izuku in his arms. He had had to beg Aizawa to allow him in the room to see his old childhood friend, but surprisingly the stoic man had allowed it as long as he was in the room. He ignored the man's gaze boring into his back and grabbed Izuku's hand, feeling the old scars and calluses that had built up from his training and healing. The anger he had felt towards the teen seemed like a distant dream. Instead, it had been replaced with a deep self-hatred for being so blind for so long. What did the doctor say? Bakugo asked Aizawa, who had come to stand next to him. They say it's extreme exhaustion and quirk overuse, Aizawa replied. He should wake up in a few days. Where's his mom? Bakugo asked, his eyes never leaving Izuku's face. In America, Aizawa said. She's been informed of his condition, but hasn't been able to make it over. Bakugo's eyebrows furrowed, but he remained silent, simply watching his old friend with a complicated expression on his face. Aizawa left him to his internal debate. He knew this was a turning point for the boy. Vlad King had told him what happened the night before the attack. He had read the reports of what had happened during their time with the League. His phone vibrated and he checked it and put his hand on Bakugo's shoulder. It's time to go, Aizawa said. Bakugo said nothing, but squeezed Izuku's hand in a silent apology before following Aizawa out the door. Bakugo was left to his thoughts until they made it to the lobby. Bakubro! Kirishima yelled in greeting from the lobby. Bakugo's head snapped up as his attention zeroed in on the red head and the bubbly pink Mina, who was now waving at him. We heard you were finally allowed to see Izuku and thought you might want some backup. You were late, Aizawa said. He's already seen him. Visiting hours are over. Mina whined, poking Kirishima. I told you we had the times flip-flopped. Wah! Kirishima said before rubbing his neck and looking down. My bad. Never mind that. Mina said, grabbing Bakugo's arm and pulling him towards the doors. Let's get something to eat and talk for a bit. You can tell us how he's doing. Bakugo grumbled, but let her pull him out of the double doors. Kirishima sent Aizawa a silent nod, which was returned, and followed the others out the doors. Aizawa turned and made his way back up to the hospital room where Izuku laid as he called the principal. Bakugo just left with his friends. It seems you were right. He really has changed. That's a relief, Netsu responded in his cheery tone. Midoriya will need all the help he can get when he wakes up. We don't know what his mental state will be like, but I have never had any reports of him being this drained before. The doctors in Tartarus say that All for One is in terrible shape. Aside from the new injuries he received from his fight with All Might, he is on a ventilator due to some old injuries and has the beginnings of osteoarthritis. The doctors were amazed he could even move well enough to fight All Might. I believe that Izuku might have healed his pain rather than any actual injuries. That would explain why he could move that well, Aizawa said as he opened the door and sat in the chair next to Izuku's bed. Recovery Girl once said that the boy could identify people by their pain signatures. Living 200 years would amount to a significant amount of pain all by itself, Nedzu went on. The boy is naturally inclined to heal others. He probably couldn't stop himself once the healing started. The doctors here compared Izuku's current physical state to his last physical with Recovery Girl, Aizawa said. The boy lost quite a bit of weight as well as stamina. Apparently, it's a miracle the boy had enough energy to breathe on his own before they got to him. How long until they expect him to wake up? Nedzu asked. A week if we're lucky, Aizawa replied. I'm more worried about the mental drain this will have on him. Indeed, Nedzu said. The boy's psychologist is aware of the situation and will be on call. How are the dorms coming along? Aizawa asked. Normally, he would be the one to personally ask the parents for permission, but with Izuku at risk, Nedzu had stationed him here and allowed All Might and Present Mic to go in their stead. All Might has convinced most of the parents. Izuku's mother is still deciding whether or not to pull him out completely, Nedzu said. She has every right to, Aizawa-sensei said. Her son has had more run-ins with villains than a sidekick in their first year. Not to mention the fact that her husband is still at large and obviously gunning for Izuku. I am hoping Recovery Girl can convince her otherwise, Nedzu sighed. I believe taking him to the States would end up making him an easier target for Azar. Not to mention that now that he has All for One's attention, knowledge of his healing abilities is being circulated in the underground as well as the hero community. The Hero Commission is starting to circle. Will the HC be a problem? Aizawa asked. Fortunately not, Nedzu replied. The forms and agreements we had Miss Midoriya sign will protect him from their influence for as long as he is enrolled in UA. I guess we'll just have to leave our hope with Shizenji then, Aizawa declared. Azar sat leisurely in the office chair at Hero Commission headquarters as a man in a finely tailored suit paced back and forth in front of him. Why did you leave like that? You were in the perfect position to get all of the information we needed from the League. I needed some time to cool my anger, Hisashi Midoriya replied calmly, leaning back further in the chair. You wouldn't have wanted me to toast UA's little darlings now, would you? He sneered, thinking of the two boys. Had grown up so much since he'd last seen them. We agreed to give you a job because of your skills and unique position once you were released, but you are proving to be a failure yet again. The man said, pausing to glare back at the infamous hero. You were the ones that told me to get out of the way of the raid, Azar said, straightening up in the chair and glaring back at the man. How was I supposed to know they wouldn't contact me again after that? The only one that liked me was Shigaraki. The others looked at me like I was garbage even compared to them. It was embarrassing. That's what happens when you gain a reputation from beating your family, Hawks said as he nonchalantly entered the room. What's up, boss? He nodded to the man, ignoring the smoke billowing out of Hisashi's mouth. Ah, Hawks. The man said, turning and bowing to the hero who had just walked in. Good, I have an assignment for you. Since Azar has let us down, we will be needing a new body on the League of Villains case. Do you think you can track them down for us? Hawks gave him a crooked smile and replied, Of course. Shizenji sighed as she made her way back to check on her protege. It had been a long day, but a feeling of anticipation filled her old bones as she shuffled towards Izuku's room. He was showing signs of waking soon, and she wanted to be there when he did. The talk with his mother had been worrying, but she had just barely managed to convince her to give the school another chance. The woman was not established enough in America to just take off at a moment's notice, or to take Izuku in quite yet, so she had had to settle for hourly updates on his condition and the promise that she would be called as soon as he woke up. Shizenji opened the door and looked fondly at Aizawa, who was asleep in the chair next to his student's bed. The man had only left the teen's side for work or nature's necessities. She knew it wasn't his fault, but that didn't stop him from blaming himself and sleeping in a hard plastic chair next to his student every chance he got. A low groan brought her attention to the bed, and she hustled forward, gently shaking Aizawa awake as she leaned over the bed to see if the boy was stirring. Aizawa yawned and brought his attention to Izuku. The teen groaned again and opened his eyes. Shizenji gasped in delight and gently grabbed his hand with her own gloved ones as Aizawa called the nurse. Izuku blinked slowly at the blurry ceiling. He didn't know where he was, but it was warm and someone was holding his hand. An old woman's voice called his name quietly and Izuku groaned as he turned his head so he could find its owner. Why did everything hurt so much? Had a healing gone wrong? That was probably it. He always overdid it, but this was the first time he had actually ended up at a hospital for his trouble. Who had he healed? He couldn't remember. It didn't matter though someone was calling his name. A different voice this time. It was male. He turned his head towards where the voices were and tried to focus his eyes. He could make out a tall black blob and a short gray blob, but nothing else. He opened his mouth to ask something but all that came out was another groan. He felt like he hadn't had anything to eat or drink in a week. Another, taller blob showed up and started asking questions. Izuku squinted trying to see who it was, but nothing became clearer. A second later a bright light assaulted his eyes causing him to hiss in pain and shut his eyes tightly. Izuku could feel a hand on his back and the bed sliding into an upright position. He begrudgingly opened his eyes up again as gentle hands placed a bottle of some kind in his hands. People were still blurry but they were beginning to come into focus. Izuku looked down at the water bottle that was in his hands and brought it to his lips. He must have been thirstier than he thought. This water tasted so good. Someone called his name again and he turned to see a tall homeless-looking man, a short doctor lady and a normal-looking doctor with goat horns protruding from his forehead. Izuku tilted his head curiously at the odd-looking group before rasping out a greeting. "Hello," Izuku said. He was rewarded with some large grins. "Who are you?" At his question, their faces froze. The tall doctor cleared his throat before asking, "I'm Dr. Shigeru," the tall man said pointing to himself. "Do you know your name?" "Midoriya Izuku." "Nice to meet you," Izuku said as he nodded to the doctor. "Good," the doctor said writing something on the clipboard he had picked up from the end of the bed. "How old are you?" Izuku thought hard but then shrugged. "I can't remember. What is the date?" "It's July 15th, Dr. Shigeru replied with a gentle smile. "Then it's my birthday," Izuku said with a smile. "Happy birthday." The doctor cheered. "What is the last thing you remember, Izuku?" Izuku brought his hand up to his chin and started to ramble quietly. "I think I was healing someone who was in a lot of pain," Izuku said. "I probably shouldn't have touched him with such a high pain signature, but he was already being treated by someone else. I could only relieve the pain for a bit. The healing took a lot out of me. I ended up collapsing after using all of my emotions and stamina. I don't remember much else. Except there was a boy. He would explode things? I was worried about him. Who was he? I can't remember but I feel like he was important somehow." "Don't worry, Izuku," the doctor said patting his shoulder comfortingly. "Your memories will come back slowly, just be patient. I need to talk to your guardians here for a bit and we'll be right back." "Guardians?" Izuku asked looking at Recovery Girl and Eraserhead. "What happened to Mom and Dad?" "They are both fine, just out of the country at the moment. These are your teachers from school. Aizawa and Shizenji-san. They are in charge of you while your parents are away." "Oh," Izuku said before zeroing in on the pair with a slow blink and bowing. "Forgive my rudeness." "Not at all, Midoriya," Shizenji said kindly while Aizawa simply nodded, his face melting into an emotionless mask to hide his worry. The memory loss should be temporary. His brain scans came back fine and this is the largest injury he has ever attempted to heal, Dr. Shigeru said as he pulled the teachers out into the hallway. This is probably his body's way of helping him deal with the stress of his kidnapping. His quirk is literally returning his functions in the order that they were sacrificed to complete the healing. The villain held on to Izuku after he passed out. It is completely possible Izuku did not have control over his quirk to stop or limit the flow of power that comes from his quirk. "He has shown signs of temporary memory loss before," Aizawa said. "After the USJ he could only remember the vague details. He overused his quirk then too and he used it when he was only half conscious to heal 13. I had to fill in the blanks for him." "Fascinating," Dr. Shigeru said as he made another note on his board. "We will have to update his psychologist about the situation, but medically, he is fine." I will keep him one more day for observation and refer him to some physical therapists. Thank you, doctor, Shizenji said with a bow before turning to her colleague. I'll fill him in and call his mother. You call Nedzu and figure out how to tell your class, all right? Aizawa nodded, recognizing the woman was allowing him some time to collect himself before coming back. He watched as the rescue hero returned to the room and listened as the pair spoke before taking a deep breath and calling his boss. He really didn't want to think about what he would tell the class. Ochako was relieved when Izuku returned to class. It had been concerning to learn that the boy had little to no recollection of any of them. It was even more surprising when Izuku had squinted at Bakugo as if he was trying to place where he had seen the boy before. Recovery Girl had explained that Izuku seemed to be able to remember basic information and skills he had, but his memories of people and events were very sketchy. The boy had seemed a lot more bashful when he came in to sit down in class. Aizawa had made the class promise not to swarm the kid, but it was almost impossible to hold back the tidal wave of students that tried to come forward to introduce themselves when study hall came around. Ida had scolded them all, while Yaoyorozu quickly and quietly led Izuku away and down to the nurse's office where he had his next class with Recovery Girl. Midoriya had thanked the girl with a blinding smile that she returned before returning to class with the others. Ida had somehow managed to corral the rest of the students into waiting until they returned to the dorms to reintroduce themselves and ask questions. Aizawa had approved it as long as he was present to make sure the boy didn't become overwhelmed, and the students let out a loud cheer. Uraraka, though, about how she had finally been able to get Izuku to call her by her first name before training camp and sulked at having to reintroduce herself to her crush. Shinso watched the maelstrom of students yelling and hollering and thought back to what he knew of the green-haired healer. It had come as a surprise to him that he was the son of a villain. He knew what kind of bullying having a villainous quirk could give you, so it must have been hard actually being the son of a villain. He thinks that if Midoriya could get back his memories, he might be able to tolerate the teen as his friend. Midoriya was overwhelmed. It seemed like everyone in class wanted to be his friend. He felt like it was a huge blessing, but also felt like he should be careful in case they turned on him somehow. He had caught a lot of other students staring at him and Yaoyorozu as they passed. They were scared of them for some reason. Izuku felt like he should know, but didn't. When he asked Recovery Girl about it, she just said to leave it be, and he had reluctantly returned to looking through his classmates' health files. They seemed really familiar, and he found that he actually did recall most of them except for the tall purple-haired boy. Apparently, Shinso was new to the class. Izuku was excited to see him use his quirk in action. Brainwashing quirks were really rare and widely feared. He must have been bullied for it. Izuku decided he would be his friend no matter what. Recovery Girl interrupted his thoughts as she asked him to restock the bandages. Izuku got up and made his way to the supply closet. He grabbed a roll of bandages when suddenly a feeling of overwhelming embarrassment came over him. An image of the girl with the gravity quirk flashed through his mind quickly. He dropped the roll and started blushing before shaking himself out of the half-memory. What was that? Did he have a crush on her, or had she said something really embarrassing? She was definitely pretty, and from the way she had been watching him in class they seemed to be close in some way. Maybe he could just ask her. Would it be awkward to do so? The class already knew he had amnesia. How blunt could he be before they got annoyed? The bell rang, pulling Izuku out of his thoughts and sending him scurrying to clean up the bandages before he had to go to his next class with Principal Nedzu. Todoroki watched as Midoriya rejoined their class for hero training. The teen was looking around as if he was trying to figure out what they were doing. He locked eyes with Todoroki and came over hesitantly. Todoroki-san, right? Izuku asked. Todoroki nodded and Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. But I remember most people's names, but you can never be sure. Sensei asked me to team up with you for our stealth exercise today. Todoroki looked over at All Might, who caught his gaze and threw him a thumbs up before looking back at the teen. Cool. Midoriya beamed at him and Todoroki had to remind himself that this was a boy and he was straight. He distracted himself by going over the details of the plan with Midoriya. The goal was to sneak by the other team while holding a fragile package. When the pair had a solid plan, they waited their turn in comfortable silence. Tokoyami and Aoyama had been paired up for the exercise, which was both fortunate and unfortunate. It was unfortunate for Todoroki and Midoriya because they had 3 pairs of eyes looking for them. It was fortunate though because Aoyama's quirk was Tokoyami's quirk weakness. Dark shadow literally disappeared anytime Aoyama's quirk was activated because the beam was too bright for him. Todoroki and Midoriya decided to split up and try to sneak by on both sides of the duo. Unfortunately, Todoroki was noticed by the avian teen who immediately sent Dark Shadow forward to get the package. Midoriya took advantage of the distraction and sprinted forward unnoticed, reaching the target area and putting his hands up so Todoroki would throw him the package. Todoroki, who had warded off Dark Shadow with a bright showing of his flames, tossed the package to the healer. Aoyama, unable to simply destroy the package with his beam, dashed forward to try and grab the package. Midoriya deftly caught the package as Aoyama slid to the floor in his attempt to snatch it just a moment too late. The bell rang indicating the exercise was over. Todoroki nodded with a small smile to the victorious teen. "Hey Midoriya, do you mind if I ask you a question?" Todoroki asked. "Of course not," Midoriya said. "What is it? What do you think of Bakugo now that you can't remember him?" Todoroki asked with burning curiosity. Izuku tilted his head and glanced around the room before his eyes settled on the explosive blonde who was currently trying really hard not to blow Mina up as she laughed at him. "I'd say he's a super extreme tsundere," he said with a confident nod. Jiro and Shuji across the room tried and failed to keep their giggles to themselves. Todoroki didn't bother to hide the smirk as he looked at the blonde across the room. "For some reason though looking at him makes me feel relieved and sad all at once," Midoriya mused. "I wonder if we grew up together or something." Before Todoroki could answer, All Might called an end to the training session and the boy practically bolted to the changing rooms trying to book it to his next class across campus. At the end of the day, Izuku dragged his feet as he followed Aizawa-sensei to the dorms. For some reason, they felt unreasonably crowded despite their exaggerated size. His entire class was sitting in the lobby spread out around the room, but when he came in, they all seemed to zero in on him. Aizawa had explained that the class wanted to ask him some questions and that he could tell them to stop whenever he felt uncomfortable or stressed. Izuku had protested at first, but then thought that perhaps some of their questions would be able to kick-start some memories of their interactions with each other. His time with Recovery Girl, Todoroki and others were bringing back the feelings he had when interacting with them, but no actual memories yet. So he braced himself and went to sit by Todoroki as Aizawa leaned against the wall watching the class with his ever-tired eyes. He wasn't actually tired, Izuku would have picked up on it if he were. The first question came from Mineta. "Do you remember how awesome I was at the USJ?" Izuku stared at him in surprise before blushing and looking to the side. "No," Izuku said, "but I remember punting you off a building for some reason. I remember being annoyed at the time, but I don't know why. Sorry, it was probably embarrassing for you." Mineta blushed and stuttered while Kaminari laughed and patted him on the back consolingly. Kirishima was the next to speak. "Do you remember who your dad is?" Izuku frowned and tried to remember. "I don't think he's been around for a long time, but I do remember being afraid of him for some reason. I don't think he's a good man." "What about your mom?" Mina asked as she elbowed Kirishima. "Oh, I remember her, she's really nice," Izuku responded enthusiastically. "Aizawa said she moved to America when I started high school here, but I don't really remember that. I wonder if she's doing all right. I should call her later." Shinso lazily raised his hand and waited for Izuku to notice him before asking his question. "What do you think of Bakugo?" Izuku looked at the brainwasher before his eyes flitted over to the explosive blonde who was uncharacteristically silent throughout the entire process. "You can ask Todoroki after I leave," Izuku said with a smile, as Todoroki paled beside him and Jiro and Shuji sent him some pitted glances. "I feel relieved that he's all right though." With this, Izuku stood up and started heading to the elevators. With a wave of his hand he said, "I'm getting tired, so if you don't mind I am going to head up to my room. Good night." The moment he left the room the entire class turned on Todoroki expectantly. Aizawa hid a smile in his capture scarf as the boy took a breath and stared directly at Bakugo as he explained. "I asked him what he thought of Bakugo during our training exercise since he couldn't remember anything quite yet. The entire class, except for Jairu and Shuji who were trying to keep their laughs stifled, leaned forward. He said that Bakugo is, and I quote, a super extreme tsundere. There was a moment of utter silence before everyone whipped their heads around to look at Bakugo, who was sitting there stunned but with an embarrassed blush coloring his cheeks slowly. Kaminari was the first to laugh and the floodgates were opened. "Shut up, you stupid extras," Bakugo said, just barely restraining himself from exploding his hands. Izuku sat down on his bed after closing the door. He looked at his hands, noting the tremor, and slowly shifted so he was sitting cross-legged in a meditating position. He closed his eyes and tried to identify all the complicated emotions that were coming to the surface. He was surprised to feel a deep and simmering rage. Izuku imagined a door right in the middle of the feeling and opened it. He watched almost distantly memories of his younger self getting beaten black and blue by his father and his peers. He watched as they then turned to those who he had helped get away from his childhood bullies, turn around and spit on his efforts. He watched teachers purposely misgrade him, nurses turn him away without care, and Kaken tell him to jump off a roof. He felt a righteous anger at his pain and despair, as well as a tainted anger he had stolen from his father all those years ago, an entitled anger and frustration at the world for turning away from him. Izuku latched on to the feeling of despair and opened another door. The feeling of sorrow nearly took his breath away. He watched the memories while struggling to breathe through the tears that were silently gushing down his face. His mother crying silently as his father insulted her and pushed her down. His father turning that scalding tongue towards him, berating him for being useless, wimpy, unintelligent. He watched as Kaken slapped his hand away at the river, as he found the first spider lily on his desk, as Kaken threw his notebook out a window. He watched as Kaken was enveloped by slime and looking desperately at the crowd, and as he failed to heal All Might's injuries. He watched as his teachers were injured at the USJ, as he inflicted pain and stole Quirk power from an enemy to heal his teachers and protect his friends. He watched as Koda mourned, Kaken revealed his pain, and the forest turned to a sea of flames. He watched as an injured homeless boy looked at him with awe and fear, as that same boy, now a man, stood with the League of Villains. He watched as he relented to his father's control, and left Kaken behind in a room of enemies unwillingly. He watched as he encountered an ancient villain's pain, knowing he would never be able to completely heal it. Fear caught his attention next. There were so many memories that overlapped with anger and despair, so much violence on both his and his enemy's parts, so many promises of pain, both emotional and physical. Native Ida Stain, Hero Commission, his mother gone, Dabi holding Koda and Shinso hostage, his father too close, too powerful, too much anger, too much danger. His breath caught in his throat as he closed his eyes. Sweat poured down his face, but slowly his fear began to abate and be replaced by a more subtle calm feeling. It was warm and began to envelop the teen, who opened his eyes as he relaxed into this feeling. He watched a memory of his mother singing him to sleep, himself playing with Kaken, the first time he healed someone. He watched a memory of eating dinner with Nedzu and Aizawa, of Recovery Girl and Nedzu listening to his rambles, of Uraraka inviting him to call her by her first name. He watched as Todoroki made sure he was alright, as his classmates complimented him and his heroes supported his dreams. A smile graced his face as a new feeling overtook his senses. Hope, bright and shining, brought memories of his father leaving, his mother finding a new job, a fellow bullying victim slipping him a thank you note after he got beat up for him. He saw All Might and Aizawa fully healed, Kaken, alive, and making true friends, Ochako making sure he was okay. Soon hope turned into determination. He felt like he was on fire and filled with energy. He saw himself running to stop countless bullies, running to save Kaken from the villains, healing Aizawa and keeping the Nomu down. He saw himself taking classes, learning, healing various people. He saw himself saving Ida. He saw himself attempting to heal a supervillain, knowing that the pain he had felt was nearly unbearable for any mortal to bear. He had the power and the ability. He would heal any who needed help. He would be a rescue hero. Izuku opened his glowing green eyes as his meditation concluded. A fierce smile took over his face as he stood up and stretched. It had been a while since he had felt this alive. Some memories were still fuzzy, but the majority of them were there. He checked the clock and was shocked to see that it was 6 a.m. His meditation had taken him the entire night. Izuku looked down at his clothes. Seeing he was still in his uniform, he quickly changed to gym clothes and went for an early morning run before classes started.